The spirits begged God's messenger to ease their suffering. The saint could do this with her blood. She sees for a long time in the future which condemns her to death. The spirits asked the Lord to bless their life in which she was not. They asked for a blessing, so the lady shouted that their future would be blessed. But no, he blesses her because she is his wife. And then the girl finally opened her eyes. The guy and the lady don't understand what's wrong with the saint. She can look into a person's future by touching them. That's why there was a line of people waiting to see her. People call this ability a gift from God, but it is nothing more than a curse that gives her the title of God's wife. And this condemns her to bear responsibility for distorted predictions it limits allows to do, or what the priests say. The saint noticed that she would soon hear good news about her, so she congratulated them. People were in tears and thanked her very much because they would finally have a child. The saint noted that everything was thanks to the salvation of the merciful god Olak, and then she said that because of this they should bless him. Yes, they will have a child, but it will die before it is born. But she shouldn't dwell on it because she can't do anything about it. The gentleman turned to the saint and said that they as priests must look after everyone to ensure that her divine gift is not tainted by the dirt of this world. This is also their duty, and they will deal with the rest of the believers, so he suggested that she return to him. The lady asked if she could take a little walk in the fresh air, because she thought it would really help her get clean. The priest told her not to change her clothes. The lady noted that she remembered this, and also that she was not allowed to talk to strangers on the street. The priest said that she must return back in half an hour. He turned to the guy and asked him to look after her. Every year during the celebration of the divine birth, people visit the temple. The saint looks into their future, but can only see what the priests allowed her to see. In gratitude, people leave something in the place where she will soon be sacrificed. It would be better if she were an ordinary person. While she was walking, she heard the children shouting at her that she had dropped her glove. The girl noticed that this was indeed the case, so she was very grateful to the children. And then the boy noticed that this was a saint. They couldn't believe that she was actually standing in front of them because she was so beautiful. The children asked if it was true that she could see the future. Although people come here during the celebration, not everyone is allowed to enter the temple, only the worthy. The boy told her that this was an obvious lie, and he did not understand how she could believe something like that. The boy simply believed that a person was simply not capable of such a thing. The lady laughed, and the girl told him that it sounded rude, so he should apologize to the saint. The lady told the children that everything was fine and remarked that the boy's words reminded her of someone. One man told her the same thing a year ago, even their facial expressions were similar. I wondered if he would come to the festival again today, the arrogant Theo Furgard. Suddenly the lady heard someone's voice. It addressed Nomi Balin, and now she understood where she had been hiding all this time. At the same time, the guy called her a witch and asked in horror what she had done to him. A year ago, they were going to visit their great-aunt, so the guy didn't understand what they were doing in the temple now. The boy said that the elders wanted him to deliver it here as a representative of their family. The guy was surprised at first, but smiled at the news. Such a rude, money-hungry scoundrel, how should he do this? These damn elders, if they had so much extra money, he didn't understand why they couldn't spend it on getting back their family heirloom that was stolen. He didn't understand if everything was all right with the people here. He didn't understand why they spent so much money on some superstitions. And then he said that the priests, as always, will take everything into their own hands, using it for their own interests. The guy noted that he should watch his words because 3 years had passed since his great-aunt's death. And then he noted that it was only thanks to their god Olak that they were standing here with him. The guy thought there that he could quite accept the fact that he would not see him again. And he continued to say that on the way here he noticed that the constellation of the Big Dipper and Libra were lined up in one line. Thanks to the energy of Olak, which fills the sky and the earth, they were lucky enough to arrive safely without losing their way. The guy thought that it wasn't quite true. The reason they arrived on time was because the sky was cloudless, so they were able to see this polar star. The guy also suggested that they just pretend that they gave it to the relationship, and they themselves would split it in half. He promised to make sure that these old men didn't find out about anything. The guy turned to Theo and said that he should not forget because today he represents their family. This is such nonsense. He assigned it to him simply because he himself is too lazy to stand in line. At another time, he would never have given up his own. And then the lady greeted him and asked him to introduce himself. He was a little confused, so he decided to end this performance quickly. He kissed her hand and said that he was Theodore Furgard. He asked her to simply bless him already. The lady understood perfectly well that she had to hurry. She approached him and said that he would soon make a big deal, so she congratulated him on his imminent profit. Theodore asked again if that was all that was needed. He thought that anyone could tell me something like that and was shocked that she would accept these offerings for that. The lady confirmed that this was all and also asked if he wanted to say anything else before the god Olak. It's just amazing that someone works hard all their life to grow and preserve this flower. And with just a couple of insincere words, she can get a whole bunch of them. The guy stood up and cleverly said that she really had a good time. Well, he thought the price of this flower would be just ridiculous for her. After this, the gentleman said that he was asking for forgiveness because he was going to make a donation. But suddenly, the lady stopped him, turning to him. He did not understand at all what she was doing. The lady begged him not to move. She would show him the true divine power he so desired to see. Exactly 1 year later, he will close a major deal but will be mired in debt because it will prove too complicated for him. So there is no doubt that he will come back here again. The guy was screaming that the ship had fallen apart and he had lost all his goods. People were almost killed. He didn't understand why they had to go so far, how they could do it, just to make him believe in this god. The lady assured him that she would never do such a thing. But Theodore couldn't believe that this was all the work of Olak, the god she believed in. So he asked her to make another prediction because he would show her how ridiculous they really were. But then they accidentally kissed all. Because of this, they fell on each other. They were very confused, but the lady did not understand what kind of future this was. She couldn't even describe what she had just seen. She didn't understand what it was, whether she saw her future or his future. After all, until now, she had only seen death in her future. The priest turned to the saint and shouted, asking what she was doing next to a stranger. The priests sent someone to follow her again, so she's not even surprised. She didn't know if she should go back because then she would definitely be sacrificed. She turned to Mr. Theodore and asked him to go with her. The girl decided that she had to make sure that her vision was real. The priest ran after her, and she and the gentleman ran away. When they had moved away a little, Theodore asked her what she was doing. The lady apologized for dragging him along so suddenly, but she wonders what he would do if he saw what he thought was impossible. That's why he came back. Her prophecy came true. The lady told him that she never lies. Nomi assured them that the future she had seen was real. They heard that they had apparently been found. She asked the gentleman to hide quickly, but he did not understand at all where he could hide. And then she decided to push him to hide. A man entered the room and thought that it was probably just the wind. After that, they kissed again. The lady again could not believe that this was reality. Nomi didn't quite understand why she began to see so many futures that she had never seen before. Theodore didn't understand what she was doing or why she bit him at all. He noted that she was a so-called saint, so he did not understand how she could do this. He noticed that there was a statue near them, which meant that they were in a temple. He believed that this was her grand escape, because they returned back to the temple. The lady turned to the gentleman and said that they needed to do it again. Theodore asked again, what was she talking about? The lady could not understand whether this was his future or whether it belonged to hers. The lady said she needed one more kiss, so she offered him another kiss. The guy thought she was just crazy, but she said she would tell him what would become his trade, and tell him what he should do in this situation, tell him everything he wants to know. He believed that the lady was simply trying to seal a deal with him and his company with a kiss. Theodore wondered what she was trying to pull off this time. It seemed like another scam, and he wondered how far it could go. So she said she advised her to think about a fair offer in return, because he hates wasting time on all sorts of nonsense. When they kissed again, it was the lady who noticed that her vision had become clearer. This is definitely her future. She believed that it is impossible to change what is predetermined by God, but in a place where his gaze could not reach, she finally got a chance to live. The lady turned to the gentleman and said that some of his goods were at the bottom of the Iris River under the sandy cliffs. If he wants to find the rest, he must come to her again tomorrow. Perhaps with this man she has a chance for a different ending. The next night at the Bellin estate, the guy had no idea what he was doing there. He couldn't explain to himself why he wanted to meet this swindler again. The goods have already been found where she said they would be, and this is clearly not without reason. So he decided he had to go and find out. Then he knocked on her door. Nomi opened the window and asked who was there, but when she saw it, she realized it was Mr. Theo. The man noted that her chambers were quite high, so it was inconvenient to get there. The girl was glad that he came, and Theodore noted that she herself had told him to come. The girl immediately began to beg him to sleep with her. Theodore was simply shocked and asked if she even understood what she was saying. Nomi said that she is talking about what men and women do when they spend the night together, and so she asks him to help her go against it and sleep with her. She showed him the 10th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Olak. It says that the wife of God must be a virgin. After that, the girl closed the Gospel and said that she no longer wanted to be her, so she just wanted the master to help her get rid of it. She said that they didn't have to spend the whole night in the same bed, but just pretend that they did it. Theodore noted that she was asking him not to sleep with her, but to accidentally get caught in front of the priests, and she confirmed this. Yes, the gentleman refused. He had no plans to die anytime soon. Nomi told him that this would never happen, and she assured him that he would be completely safe, because in her charge in a few years, he will have the Iron Crown in his hands. This intrigued him, so he asked again if she was talking about the Iron Crown. The saint confirmed it. Nomi also said that it has a built-in compass and is silver in color. After that, the guy grabbed her and asked how she knew about their family heirloom. Nomi tried to prove to him that she saw her in his future. Theodore then thought that this girl really could have some abilities. The girl promised to tell him everything about how his trading company would be restored and how he would become the owner of the Iron Crown. So she begged him to help her. After that, she was already sitting on him and asking if she was too heavy. Nomi was very worried, so she said that if it was too much, they could change positions. But the guy said it was fine and was surprised that she was reading now. This is the book that the maids passed around, and it says that it is enough for them to spend the night like this. So the gentleman asked him how he would like to do it, but the gentleman noted that she never ceases to disappoint him. If they are still just pretending, then she can do as she wants. She continued to sit on him like that, so the gentleman asked how long she planned to stay in this position. Nomi thought he was uncomfortable so they could change positions. He said everything was fine, but he didn't understand why she wasn't moving. After that, he asked her not to tell him that sleeping with him meant this. Nomi said that yes, the priest would be shocked when they found out about it. He couldn't express because he really is really considered because the action is limited to this. He knew it could drag on if he didn't just show her. So he grabbed her and put her in a different position and then added that nothing would change if he continued in this spirit, and now he needs her to start moaning. The mistress started moaning because she was very embarrassed and asked him to stop. The guards heard this, so they burst into the saint's room and asked what had happened. Theodore noticed that they had arrived quite quickly, as if they had been following from the very beginning. They pushed him away and told him to stay away from the saint and also asked if she was okay. Theodore remarked that she had better keep her promise. She believed that after this, believers would probably condemn her for the rest of her life. Well, it's better than dying. You'll please them with that. After that, she watched as her guards were beaten. She begged his priesthood to stop this. The gentleman got tired and said that Nomi Bellin was a woman who should be sacrificed as God's wife. This servant, I don't know why he is being beaten now because no one should know about the sin that she committed today. He said that this never happened, and also asked her if she understood this. The junior priest reported that Fergard had been told to keep his mouth shut. How lucky they were that the god closed his eyes for a second. Thanks to the grace of the great Olak, she is still his wife. On the day she comes of age, the ceremony will take place as planned. Nomi said that if they put her on the altar after she was tainted, it could lead to terrible consequences. She asked him, but the master did not understand how a simple lamb could think that he knew God's will. He said that it was enough that she had disgraced the honor of both them and Lord Olak today, so he ordered her to stop desecrating his wife's title, and he told her to go back to her place and think about her behavior. Theodore's brother came to him and asked him what he had done there. He doesn't even understand how much it cost him to get him out of there. It's lucky that House Bologna was kind enough to keep what happened today a secret. The guy was surprised that they didn't want to make it public, but he didn't understand why. The brother hoped that Theodore had learned his lesson and should not interfere in their affairs anymore. It is not for nothing that the elders say that an aristocrat must behave appropriately. And then he noticed that Theodore had run away. He didn't care that they had thrown him out. She hadn't told him about their family heirloom. What a fool you have to be to follow her whim before getting an answer. The boy simply could not believe that he was doing this again because of her. He heard the servants say that they were very sorry for Saint Nomi. They were born on the same day at the same time. But while the portrait of one is on display for all to see, the other is forced to live as if in a cage. They thought that it was really unfair in such a situation. Even being beautiful was a sin. Simply by calling the wife of God, they condemned her to death, and they did not even know how this was different from murder. Mr. Enzo will soon marry a young aristocrat, but the saint will most likely not live to see it. After that, they thought in the summer that someone might hear about it. But they are right, calling her the wife of the Lord. They did not give her a life happier than even theirs, and this is really true. Theodore thought she was like a princess, surrounded by care and flowers. It turns out he was wrong. Meanwhile, the saint was in her room in horror, because nothing had changed. And she knew she couldn't change anything. This is what Olak is like. This is what the future holds for her. She will simply die and no one will help her. And suddenly she heard someone touch her, so she screamed. Theodore whispered that it was him. The lady was surprised he asked if she was to be sacrificed. After this, she burst into tears, but the gentleman wiped away her tears and asked her to try to cry more quietly. He will never understand this. How can you sacrifice a person to a god who was created for the same people? Nomi told him that the elder believed that this would soften Olak's anger, and then he would have mercy on them. He himself said so a long time ago. The guy thought that no matter what family the elders belong to, they always create nothing but problems. They think that what they say is right. He remembered how they said that an aristocrat who went into business was somehow vulgar. They said he would only destroy his family, so he suggested the saint simply imagine that God really wanted to have a wife and asked if she would agree to be one. Nomi told him that she didn't agree. It only scared her, that's why she always wanted to run away. She even tried to rebel, but nothing changed. In the end, she will just die. The guy pointed out that if she didn't want to sacrifice herself, then she shouldn't do it. He told her from now on to live the way she wanted and to get rid of the title that she hated. He wondered how it would be if he married someone else and thus avoided his death. The girl said that she didn't even know who would want to marry her because marriage to someone like her could cause the wrath of God. This person must be one of those who does not fear Olaka and does not need her abilities. And it so happened that he knows of a country where marriage with her would not be prohibited. It is Seon. She also already knows that Olak is not so scary to him and he needs her predictions. So he proposed to her to marry him. Arriving on business in Ceylon, he saw that there were no prohibitions on love for people there. They fell in love and could marry at will. Nomi said that if he took her as his wife, he would probably never be able to come back here again, so she wasn't sure he was ready for that. The gentleman said it was all or nothing, and besides, she had already told the truth twice. If she helps him find the family heirloom, he can live without returning to his homeland, so he asks her to tell him what she saw. The girl wondered if she could use this man's future as a guarantee for survival. Theodore said that if she could become an ordinary girl, the people here would no longer have a reason to hold her back. Nomi will get what she wants, and he will get what he wants. Yes, as he said, it is not only for her benefit, it was beneficial for both of them. So the girl told him that she agreed. Breaking news was announced the saint was engaged. She was going to marry Theodore Furgard. But people were shocked and did not understand whether it was true that the saint could enter into marriage. They didn't think they should continue calling her a saint. Then today's news concerns the wedding announcement, which was made at dawn. The priest was simply horrified and asked the guy how he could not know where Olak's wife was now. Judging by the missing horses, it can be concluded that she escaped by land. The leader was very angry with her. She really wants to be killed, so he shouted at her to find her immediately. The guy said that he would definitely return her and give her into Olak's arms. They saw the saint and there was a chase after her. They threw the rope. Everyone should have stopped, but it wasn't her. Theo said that if they chased after them, they would most likely be caught, and said that the horses of House Bellin were probably much faster. The girl did not understand what they should do then, but the gentleman said that if he let a couple of horses go, they would think that they were trying to escape by land, but instead they would sail across the sea. They asked the sailors to wait, and the boy knew they wouldn't make it at that rate. Theo decided that they had no way out, so he jumped on board and shouted at the girl to jump because he could catch her. And then they found her and said that the saint must stop. They were ready to intervene, but the girl had already made her choice. She was determined and was not going to stop. The girl made up her mind and jumped into his arms. The sailor announced that the ship was boarded and they would soon set sail. The ship was ready to leave and the time for reflection was over. Nomi asked the gentleman why he wanted the bird. The guy replied that he had a friend who lived in Ceylon. He knew that this man could be trusted, so he was going to send him a message. Theodore told her not to take off her hood because she stood out too much from the others. He was worried that her bright appearance might cause problems on the road. The girl thought about what would happen to the people she left behind. Theo assured her that they would be fine and she shouldn't worry. He would try to take care of her and everyone. The road to Ceylon was long, so they had to wait until they could continue on their way. Time was on their side, but they had a long road ahead of them. The girl was shocked because what she saw was not her vision or even a dream. It was a real sea, and she was now standing right in front of it, feeling its grandeur. She now knew that the sea was even more beautiful in real life. Even the air here was different, not like on land. Its freshness and salty smell awakened in her unprecedented sensations. Although the scent was not the most pleasant, she was surprised. She thought that this was indeed the smell of the sea, but its strangeness only added to the feeling of incomprehensibility of what was happening. She had seen whales even in books, but this was her first encounter with them in reality. These giant creatures moved with great grace, and she could not take her eyes off them. She was shocked that whales actually moved in groups and not alone as she had previously thought. Theo, approaching her, explained that these were not whales, but dolphins. Theodore told her to be careful because they had a long way to go. He warned her that it would be problematic if she got hurt because the journey was just beginning. The girl was happy and excitedly told the gentleman that she saw whales. Theo corrected her with a smile, explaining that they were dolphins, not whales. In 2 days they would be at the Black Desert Rocks. After that, when they had overcome them, they would meet him and then they would be able to get help. But there was another problem ahead of them. The problem was her. Considering that everything that had happened in just half a day, she was starting to feel confused. Questions and doubts were plaguing her. She was offered to try something, but Theo stopped her and said that she should not take everything that was offered into her mouth. He was wary and concerned for her safety. Theo didn't understand why she was holding the dog's bowl. The girl explained that she just wanted to feed him, but the guy couldn't understand why she did it. The girl's hair was tangled and Theo had no idea what she had done to make her hair like that. He was a little surprised but tried to remain calm in the situation. She might even die now before they reached their destination if she was not careful. It was at moments like these that Theo realized the gravity of the situation. Nomi approached the gentleman and he asked her what she wanted. He was already used to her sudden requests and was not surprised by her anxiety because it all happened so quickly. The girl wanted to tell him something. Nomi wanted to thank him because despite everything she felt happy for the first time. Theo smiled too, feeling her gratitude. Theodore added that she said, "for the first time," but it was obvious that she was so exhausted and tired. He suggested that they go dancing a little to relax. Theo noticed that she had enough energy despite her tiredness. He smiled, hearing how happy she was, and it seemed sincere to him. But soon the girl began to feel sick. Theo expected this since she had never traveled on a ship before. He tried to calm her down, knowing that it was just seasickness. The girl told the gentleman that she felt dizzy. Theo explained to her that it was seasickness, which everyone who travels by sea for the first time experiences. Theo tried to calm her down and told her it was just seasickness, which usually went away after a while. He recommended that she just close her eyes and try to relax until she got used to the rocking of the ship. The lady was shocked because this was not in her vision. He was surprised that she easily looked into the future and others, but had difficulty in her own. It's a strange ability, Nomi noted, that the prophecy doesn't show everything at once. She can see a flying bird but does not understand where it is flying. Theo said that this is why he is uneasy. She is a saint who sees prophecies but incompletely, and he risked everything by betting on her. The lady said she was curious about something. Nomi was wondering how important this family heirloom was, that he had sacrificed so much for it. The gentleman remained silent and then added that she could prove the value of his life. Theo trusted and followed only one person, and he inherited this thing from him. Therefore, the gentleman will do everything possible to get her back. Nomi didn't understand at all how this object could prove its importance. The gentleman told her that she did not need to know such things yet because they were matters for adults. The girl decided that then at least he could tell her about the plan. I wonder what this place is. It is a fertile land as alive as the people who live there, like an oasis in the middle of the desert. The lady hoped that there, as its name suggested, they could find solace. Then they moved on horseback. The gentleman asked her if she saw the black rocks over there. After this, once they have overcome them, they will be considered citizens of Ceylon. This meant that they would be able to get a guarantee of protection, which at least gave them some confidence in their safety on this dangerous path. But suddenly he felt something strange and instantly told her to duck. He was wary, realizing that this could be a threat coming from pursuers. The girl didn't want to believe that they had already been caught up, that reality had turned out to be cruel. But looking back, she saw that Enzo was there, and it was already too obvious. The boy was surprised to notice that he was impressed by this. He did not know whether it was the result of her efforts or the merit of the one who accompanied her and led her through dangers. They used the sea route, and having covered a long distance, reached the border itself. Theo realized that he had to act immediately and decided that they had to escape immediately. One of the servants shouted that he would follow them. The master remarked that this was rather funny because the servant acted as if he had no other choice. The servant did not understand what the master was talking about because he was simply amused by watching her despair. He could not help but smile seeing how worried she was. Her whole life had been one big escape, but for her it always seemed like a meaningless utopia. She didn't believe that everything would ever end happily. They were moving too slowly, and at this rate they would surely be captured. Time was running out, and every step was becoming more and more crucial to their salvation. The lady began to say that they urgently needed to get to the shadow of the rocks to find shelter and escape pursuit. The shadow seemed to be their only chance for salvation. But the gentleman did not understand why. Perhaps she had thought of something, so he tried to control it faster. The gentleman was surprised that this was all and noted that there was no point in jumping here. Too, seeing their recklessness, he couldn't help but think that things would end differently, that they wouldn't be able to escape the consequences of their actions. He expected things to turn out differently, but it seemed his premonitions were not justified. Soon his expectations were not met, and to stop them he shot an arrow which hit the horse accurately. The fall became inevitable, and the situation took an unpredictable turn. As they began to fall, Theo quickly reacted, grabbing the girl so that she was on top of him and not the other way around. He wanted to keep her from falling by taking the brunt of the impact. At that moment, he was immediately tied up and the girl was seized. He was stunned that among the pious fur guards there was someone so brave ready to go to such extremes. The gentleman was surprised that he dared to try to marry a saint, given the doctrine that his entire family should be punished. It was a violation of all norms. However, the priests following their traditions sought to show mercy. So he decided that he would take only the life of this brave man, leaving the rest alone. The look he gave her was one of determination, that he was willing to do anything to hurt Mr. Theo. That look clearly showed that he would not stop. The girl realized that she couldn't let the worst happen. With determination in her eyes, she broke free of his grip and snatched the sword from her brother, ready to protect Theo at any cost. She shouted at Enzo to stop. If he dared touch Theo, she promised to cut her own throat. It was her last warning. She demanded that he let him go. Being sure that her brother would never let her die, she repeated the request again, counting on his decision. She firmly stated that her life did not matter if it had to be sacrificed to a god. She repeated that they had to let Theo go, even if it meant her own death. She didn't care about returning to their darkness, to their captivity. Her brother noticed that she was behaving like a cornered mouse, as if she couldn't see a way out of the situation. He couldn't understand why she continued to resist, not giving in, but suddenly they were ordered to stop. All attention was focused on the new turn of events. An arrow flew right in front of the master's face, and at that moment they were attacked. Everyone stood ready, realizing that the situation was getting out of control. One of the attackers said that they had a saying in Ceylon: "The lands under the shadow of their mother rock belong to them." This phrase carried deep meaning and symbolism. However, not everyone present may have known this saying. The man said it with a smile, clearly knowing that this phrase would sound like a sign to those present. In his letter, Theo assured him that they would at least be able to reach the rock safely, which would be their refuge and a place to protect themselves from threats. If he had delayed even a little bit, Theo would already be talking to his headless body, because he knew that the situation was becoming more and more dangerous with every passing moment. Theo noted that his appearance was quite spectacular. The men stood there in confusion, not understanding who he was and what his goals were in appearing so unexpectedly. The gentleman noted that just like the handsome young man standing next to them, they were very happy to see all those who came to Ceylon as new citizens. But he sees that they came here with weapons, so that changes things completely. This tattoo means that he is a knight of the Ceylon Palace, and if they don't continue, the situation may get worse. The master ordered them all to lower their weapons. The man remarked that this was excellent because at least one of them was sensible. Now, before the shadow grew any bigger, they had to leave his friend alone and go. Enzo knew that time was running out and they had to act fast before the situation got out of hand. He also told them not to forget to return his spear. This was an important reminder, as weapons had always played a key role in their lives, and losing one could have serious consequences. The servants turned to their master asking what they should do in this situation. They were confused and did not know what to do, because they were faced with an unclear problem that required a quick solution. Enzo, with his usual determination, said that there was nothing they could do, and that they had to report to the archbishop everything they had seen. He was sure that this was the only right thing to do in this situation. He made a decision on what to do next. The lady immediately went to Mr. Theo as soon as she heard his conclusion. She understood the importance of this moment and wanted to make sure that everything would be done properly with due responsibility. She was glad that everything had gone well. The man ordered the servant to bring a horse for the two so that they could continue on their way and finish their business without wasting time. Pierre could not hide his joy at seeing his friend after such a long time and noted that they had not seen each other for many years after many winters had passed. He was delighted with the reunion. Theo added with a smile that despite the years, Pierre was still the same as before. He said that he had a lot of fun putting on a little show for them to show how close they were to each other. Theo tried to show how close he and Pierre were and introduced him to Noemi so that she could understand the importance of this acquaintance and the connection between them. Theo said that Pierre was the friend who lived in Ceylon that he had mentioned earlier. Now they could meet, and Noemi could feel the closeness he had described. Pierre said, with a smile, that he could now consider himself to have repaid his debt to Theo, which was an important step for him. But Theo replied with a joke that he shouldn't be made laugh, because it wasn't about the debt at all. Pierre asked Theo how he managed to win the heart of such a beautiful girl, because it seemed almost impossible. Theo just chuckled, not attaching much importance to this question. Pierre, as a sign of respect, kissed Noemi's hand, and she in turn saw another vision. This time, Theo's family heirloom appeared in her vision, which surprised her. Noemi couldn't understand why this relic was in Pierre's hands. She thought that perhaps he could help them find it and solve the mystery that was about to unfold before them. They sent soldiers to retrieve the girl, which was the only way to resolve the current situation and protect her. Noemi felt that her role here was very important. Pierre was convinced that he would never be in love with anyone and would remain alone, but apparently he was a romantic at heart, and this situation made him reconsider his views. Theo told him to shut up, not wanting to listen to his conversations. The lady thought that perhaps she was just imagining things and needed to focus on more important matters. Theo assured her that Pierre was his loyal friend. The gentleman said that he could be trusted and promised that everything would be under control. She decided not to worry again. Pierre promised to personally accompany them to his village. He offered to stay with him for a few days so that they could rest and prepare for the next stage of the journey. Theo noted that this was very noble of him, especially considering that Pierre was clearly busy. Pierre said that he now had free time since he quit. Theo was surprised, and Pierre explained that he was currently fighting crime in his village. This was unexpected, and Theo immediately sensed that there was something important behind it. Theo thought Pierre was the best knight in the country, and he couldn't make sense of what was happening. If Pierre told him about it himself, then there must be a good reason for it. Pierre said that his village was as big as the capital, which meant that he was a really important figure. Theo gave the order to prepare for the reception of guests. Nomi was probably exhausted after such a long journey, so she could definitely use some rest. Theo told her to get on her horse to continue the journey. The girl asked where they were going, and Theo replied that they were going to one of the most beautiful villages in the country. It was another step in their journey full of new impressions. Theo explained that the village of Antena was located on a major trade route, which meant that Noemi would be able to see people of all walks of life and goods for all tastes, which she would certainly appreciate. Theo was sure that Nomi would be happy because they were almost at their destination. He expected her joy to be sincere as always when she encounters something new and exciting. Pierre, noticing that his friend had not been here for a long time, remarked that he was not a frequent visitor to these parts. The boy, a little puzzled, asked the lady to take him by the hand, and they continued their journey together. He asked if she was okay because she didn't look well. His gaze was full of concern because she did look a little pale and weak, which made him very wary. The lady began to fall, but Pierre managed to catch her and anxiously told her to be careful. He added that the ground was not what it once was, and it was impossible to simply step on it as before because of the danger hidden in the sands. She was very grateful to him for saving her, and Pierre noted that there are areas that pull people underground and that one must be extremely careful, otherwise one can end up in trouble without any hope of salvation. Pierre ordered them to follow him and watch carefully where they stepped, as he knew these places much better and knew how easy it was to fall into a dangerous trap. The lady thought about how the sand that was pulling people down was very strange. It didn't seem like normal sand. It had a special property, and she couldn't understand how it managed to pull people down. The boy didn't understand what had happened in Antera because he had only heard vague rumors about the place. Pierre said that it was an old name, and that much had changed since the place became part of the new reality. Now this place was known as an oasis of expectation, a place where the land was cursed. And now every night a howl is heard here, a reminder that there was once something important and alive here. It was a long way to the hall, and Pierre promised to explain everything on the way. The Antera that Theo remembered had once been known as a shopping center, a thriving place, but now everything looked very different. Everyone considered this place a paradise with fertile land and enough water. It was an ideal territory for trade where people could find everything they needed and enjoy prosperity. No one suspected that such a life here would ever end. But one day, a letter came from the palace that changed everything, and from that moment, a new era began for Antera. From today on, Antera was to become a plantation for the cultivation of the sacred flower, Antena, and be under special management. This decision was made by the monarch, and now all life in Antera would change forever. People expected that if they took care of the flowers, the king would be kind to them because it was a sacred plant that brought good luck to those who took care of it. However, it took only 6 months for this faith to turn into despair. The flowers consumed enormous amounts of water, enough to dry up the land and deprive people of drinking water. Antera became a barren desert where eventually even the flowers began to die. Nothing could save this oasis that was once full of life and hope. The merchants left the place one by one, and from then on it was no longer a trading center. All that was left of that greatness was just empty land, where not even what was once precious grew. In the language of Ceylon, this place meant white flower, and now Theo understood something. The white flower was connected to this place, and it was not just a coincidence, but part of a much deeper story. The lady noticed that the white flower seemed to bring trouble wherever it was. She felt that this flower did not bring good luck, but rather led to disasters and destruction. Theo couldn't believe it. Perhaps the flowers people were giving her were Antena. The revelation was too unexpected to immediately grasp its full significance. If that was the case, then no one here should know that Nomi was a saint. Theo knew that it could have unpleasant consequences if someone found out her true origin. His friend raised his glass and asked for attention. They had a special guest today, and he offered to welcome his friend, who, despite everything, did not forget his land and his roots. Theo didn't understand why he needed to greet them since they had seen each other often, and there was no particular reason for such ceremonies. He felt that it was all somehow unnecessary. Pierre noted that he was right, but for his friend this was the first time he could simply enjoy the moment because such meetings did not happen often and they had their own special value. The boy realized that this was bad because there was a chance that people would find out if they continued talking to them. Theo didn't want their conversations to lead to secrets being revealed. He realized that there was a mark on her gloves. He had forgotten that it was the mark of the Bellone family. It could give away her origin and raise questions from those who knew the symbol. He decided that the people here could not possibly not know about her origin, so he asked her to remove her gloves. He understood that it was necessary for their safety. The girl was surprised, and Pierre noted that this was the etiquette here. He took off her gloves himself, not wanting to attract attention and risk their secret. Theo said that they would stay with him for now, and the girl was surprised and looked at her hands as if realizing that hidden signs could have serious consequences. Pierre came up to her and asked her what she did for a living since she was the wife of his close friend, and he still knew nothing about her. This was the first time he felt the need to know more about her life before marriage. Nomi was silent for a moment as if considering how best to respond. Theo intervened, saying that she was the daughter of an influential family. All her elders were servants to the monarch, and that explained a lot. They had married in a hurry, and because of this, Nomi had not been able to shine in Soviet society because all her family connections remained hidden. Theo tried to explain that it was not her choice. Pierre was surprised and repeated that she was from an influential family and then noted that he had succeeded. He always respected people with such connections and was already beginning to think how this could affect their future communication. Enzo was riding with his servants, and suddenly they noticed the flag of the royal family. It was strange because such a symbol was not expected to be seen in this place, which made him wary. They were at a loss as to why the royal knights were there. Enzo, thinking, offered to greet them, thinking that they might be there for some obscure reason related to intelligence or other matters. Enzo thought they must have come to check things out, so he offered to greet them. He saw how excited they were and thought that this would clear up any confusion. Enzo and some of the servants greeted Mr. Hugo, who immediately noted that he now understood why Enzo seemed familiar, because he had heard that he was currently going through hard times. The royal family keeps the Bellones under control, and Hugo Montemond has the worst reputation among them. This knowledge led Enzo to believe that the royal knights were not here by chance, and that their visit was connected to something important. It seemed that the rumors had spread quickly, but Enzo believed that everything would soon be resolved. He was sure that this situation would not last long and that the royal power would soon restore order. Hugo looked at them carefully, then noted that he was surprised, but still wished them luck. His gaze was full of hidden meaning, as if he knew more than he was saying out loud. They passed each other, and Hugo whispered that their group was too small for the prize he was trying to get. It was said with a hint of disdain, as if he thought them too weak for what they were trying to do. Enzo wanted Noemi to hide so well that Hugo would never find her. He understood that her safety was at risk and was willing to do anything to keep her secret. He wanted her to hide and protect what was dear to her from him because Hugo was too dangerous to risk. Enzo knew she needed to be safe. In the bar, everyone was very happy for the commander because he was always winning. He was a charismatic leader, and all his subordinates respected him for his willpower and steadfastness in the fight. Theo thought it might be a good idea to take her to the ward to rest. He knew the tension was building and he didn't want her to worry anymore. Now was a good opportunity while Pierre was busy. But suddenly, the woman approached the girl and invited her to go play. Theo was surprised that they suddenly decided to put everything aside to have fun. The woman pulled her along and said that in their village they were playing a special game and they needed another person. It was unusual, but Nomi decided not to refuse because maybe it would help her relax. The woman continued to say that the game was unique to their village and they needed one more player. Nomi, despite her fatigue, agreed, realizing that this was a chance to feel part of the local life. Pierre turned to his friend and asked if he really wanted to spend all his time with his wife. He joked that he was starting to look like a typical married man and insistently suggested that he drop everything and join the game. Theo, chuckling, replied that he couldn't be with his wife all the time and agreed with Pierre. He felt that a little break from serious conversations would be good for everyone. After that, the boys fought in arm wrestling. It was a moment of light competition, and everyone who was present enjoyed watching their strength and skills. Pierre noted that in Ceylon, they say that when two people fall in love, a falcon begins to circle around them. This strange but beautiful comparison made everyone think about the meaning of this symbol. All because the falcon supposedly wants to meet the couple and then bring them a child symbolizing the future and the continuation of the family. Pierre was sure that this was not just a phrase, but part of old folk wisdom. After that he laughed and asked if they had seen a falcon. Theo, slightly displeased, said that if Pierre continued such jokes, it would already be considered harassment. He asked again how Pierre could dare insult such a precious holy virgin as Noemi, his voice sharp to remind her of the limits of decency. Platinum hair, silver eyes. She could only belong to one family. It was the type of appearance that immediately evoked associations with a special aristocracy indicating her high origin. When Pierre heard the name of the flower, he should have immediately understood that he was connected to them. It was a name that could not be just a coincidence, and now he understood that much of what was happening was not a coincidence. So Pierre wondered how long Theo was going to keep this quiet, because everything was becoming more and more obvious, and no one could help but notice the strangeness of what was happening. They sat and played the game, but the girl did not understand what she had to do. She felt out of place because the local rules were new to her and not entirely clear. People told her to delay, but she didn't understand what that meant. She tried to follow the instructions, but everything seemed too complicated and confusing. Others said that she should put something down already, so the girl decided to throw anything just to finish this moment and not attract unnecessary attention to herself. He continued again that she couldn't do anything right at all, but the same person who had criticized her told the old hag to shut up, which offended her greatly. The woman didn't understand how he dared to make such an indecent gesture in front of the guests. It was too rude and inappropriate, and everyone felt the tension in the air. Noemi felt happy despite the strange atmosphere. She thought that maybe this was real life, full of unexpected turns and new sensations. She would never have known this without going to the temple. The woman noticed that she looked like a noble lady, so she thought that she would not be able to handle any of their fun, but she managed to drink and even play this game. So they were curious where she learned it. Noemi assured that it was all her first time, but she was having a lot of fun. It had been a while since they had guests, so they had fun too. The atmosphere was relaxed, and everything seemed more alive than usual. However, they noted that if it weren't for that damn saint, every day could be like this. Noemi asked again what they were talking about. The man said that there was a holy maiden who served the god Olak, or Smolak. This name sounded strange, but he was sure that her influence on everything that happened was enormous. She was obsessed with the flowers of Antena. Their king must have been bewitched by her too. That would explain the strange fascination with flowers which could cause many troubles in this place. He said that suddenly, without any explanation, the king wanted to grow these flowers in the village, and now this is what it all led to. It all seemed so confusing and meaningless, but in fact it all made quite sense if you look at it from another perspective. Now the girl understood that Mr. Pierre was talking about the Antena flower that the believers brought. These flowers were the cause of all the problems, starting with the king himself and ending with their failures in the village. Theo told him that she was innocent. She had no choice because her family had forced her to do it. It was a forced situation in which she had no choice. She was just a pawn in their game. Even her own brother shot her with a bow. That's how much the Balans devalue her, treating her like an object. It was the moment she realized that her life had no value to her family, and she couldn't resist. She is an unhappy girl who was forced to marry him just to live. The whole marriage seemed like a scam to her, and she dreamed of another, but she could not change anything. Pierre, as if angry, quickly damaged it. Everyone began to rejoice because the commander had won, and now it became clear why he was the main one in this group. The gentleman suggested that this be the end of the welcome party. He felt that the situation had been too tense, and now was the time to take a break from all these discussions. Because his friend was leaving tomorrow, he asked them not to clean up the place but to prepare a room for them instead. Everything had to end peacefully so that there would be no unnecessary questions. Pierre said that if it were up to him he would make a fuss here, but he would show him one last favor. It was a kind of gesture of respect, even if his thoughts were far from peaceful. He said that they should quietly leave the village while he turned a blind eye. The situation was such that they needed to escape as quickly as possible before anyone noticed them. He also ordered him to stop carrying something like that and to take the girl's gloves out of his pocket. It was a gesture that showed that the situation was becoming even more tense than before. He had to do it if he didn't want to die. There was rage in his eyes, and everyone could see that the consequences could be dire for those who disobeyed. Theo was shocked because his friend had told them to leave tomorrow. It was unexpected, and it seemed like they had no choice but to leave at that very moment. It didn't look like he would change his mind, so it was better to leave Antena at dawn. Theo was sure that everything could change, and this was the only chance to leave the place before it was too late. The girl was very upset because this village had become like this because of her. Everything that happened seemed to be the result of her presence, and she felt responsible for the destruction that had happened here. That's why Mr. Teo revealed her identity. The woman reported that they had come and gave them a room. It wasn't easy, but she felt that everything that was happening couldn't go unnoticed. Theo was surprised that they shared a room. The woman said that of course it was, since they were married. It was quite natural in their society, but Theo had not expected such an approach. The woman remarked that she might look ugly, but it was quite a luxurious table to set up. After all, she meant 5 children here. This comment confused Theo a little, but he realized that life here was not as simple as it might first seem. This woman had a very strange look. She seemed different from everyone else. You could see in her eyes that she was hiding much more than she was showing. Theo said that the bed would be at her disposal because he would be lying on the sofa. He did not want the girl to feel uncomfortable, but he was ready to sacrifice his own comfort for her convenience. Nomi turned to the gentleman and noted that it seemed that Olak had left an indelible mark on him. It was something deeper than just memories of the past. She couldn't pretend she didn't know any longer. It was all becoming too obvious, and she had to make a decision about how to move forward. Theo grabbed her by the shoulders, looking her straight in the eye, and asked if Pierre had said anything to hurt her. He was sure he was trying to intimidate her in his absence. The lady realized with surprise that Theo knew about everything. She was amazed that he had not warned her earlier, knowing that Pierre could have hurt her with words while he was away. Theo said he saw no point in interfering, because everything that was happening would only be an additional burden, not a solution to the problem. He was sure that he would solve everything himself without unnecessary talk. But the lady replied that he shouldn't have made the decision for her. She could handle it herself, even if it meant facing difficulties in figuring out what was going on. Theo was not happy with her answer. He couldn't see how it would help, since it would just make things awkward and complicated, which was already difficult. Pierre was aware of all the events and suggested leaving at dawn. He believed that leaving at the first rays of the sun was the best way to avoid all the troubles and leave everything behind. But the lady was adamant that she wanted to stay and try to help these people. She felt that if she left, she would not be able to justify her actions to herself. Theo was indignant, asking if she really thought these people needed the help of a saint. He was sure that they deserved their fate and did not want to change their lives. Theo thought she was very lucky that she had escaped danger, but now that she was still insisting on her decision, he was sure it was better to just leave. Nomi clenched her fists and said she didn't care. She was convinced that there was a way to help these people despite all the obstacles and dire consequences that might await her. Theo was furious, not understanding her choice. He believed that she missed the role of the victim and did not understand that she was once again walking towards a terrible death by choosing this path. He was disappointed with her decision, calling her actions idiotic. Nomi responded that once her life was not up to her, but now everything is different and she must act in her own way. She understood that before she couldn't control her life, but now, even if her decision seems ridiculous, she must take responsibility for her choice and no longer be afraid. Theo said that she needed to pretend she didn't know anything and stay out of it, because taking action wouldn't do any good in a place like that, and with people like that. Nomi felt that he, like her family, considered her worthless, and this hurt her. She could not accept that her life and her actions had to be constantly subordinated to the opinions of others. Theo tried to convince her that those people were using her. He tried to explain that she had fallen into a trap and that his actions, even if they were harsh, were dictated by concern for her. Theo thought that perhaps he himself was not so different from those people who used her. The lady noted that at least she had tasted freedom and now did not want to return to her old life. The lady said that although she had realized the importance of freedom, she now felt as if she had returned to the dungeon where she had been kept, despite all her attempts to choose another path. Theo told her that it was time to rest and that she needed to go to bed, as he needed to get some fresh air and calm down a bit so that he could come back to the situation with new thoughts. Nomi was upset and angry because before she could only hide and tell people about the future, but now she felt like she had to do something and change everything. She couldn't get rid of the thought that despite all her efforts, nothing would change, that events would go in circles again and lead to the same result as before. But she made a firm decision that she had to change everything, because only she could do something meaningful while she had a chance not to miss the moment for salvation. When she opened her eyes, she saw that she was in some kind of field, and she couldn't figure out where she was. This feeling of helplessness made her even more determined to figure this out. She realized that once she left him, difficulties would appear on her path again. This meant that her decision to leave him had serious consequences that could not be simple. Nomi didn't know who this young man was and decided to ask him a question to understand what was happening to him and how he related to her current situation. The man was surprised by her question, saying that his appearance might be unfamiliar, since he knew that many people were talking about him, and this might confuse her. He explained that he had thought she might be confused by his new appearance, but now he realized that she did not recognize him, despite all the rumors that were circulating about him among people. Then the man, who seemed mysterious and strange, suddenly turned into a statue and mockingly asked if it would be easier for her if he remained like that. It was his way of testing her reaction. Now that he had returned to his true form, the girl finally recognized him. He was the powerful being she had been told about. This was Olak, her god, and he was here to take her away. Olak looked at her with deep regret, noticing how she had changed. He said that he was rooting for her, seeing her suffering, but he thought that life was too cruel for her to become a bride. He noted sadly that the time had come, and now that he missed her, he thought she should return to where she belonged to await the day when she would be in his arms. Olak, continuing to look at her, stated that it hurt him to see her like this, and hoped that she would return to where she really needed to be, to his world, where his love and destiny awaited her. He urged her to return home where she belonged, and there in the end she would expect to meet him as a god, and everything would again be according to his plan. Nomi objected strongly, saying that she had no intention of returning. She now knew that her life and her decisions had to be independent and not subject to someone else's will. Olak was taken aback by her answer. He couldn't understand why she was so sure of her resolve. He kept asking what was wrong with what he had offered her, the wedding he was ready to give her. Nomi sadly said that her marriage to him would have been just another mistake, and that she could not accept his sacrifice, especially knowing how her actions had led to the destruction of the village. She reminded him that as a saint, she had already turned the village into ruins, and now she realized that she could not return to the life that had existed before her intervention. Olak, his voice growing colder, asked if she was refusing to be his wife, and what that meant. She would not follow the laws he had created for everyone? He was shocked by her courage, believing that she could not control her destiny as she pleased. He did not give her the right to choose, and her refusal of his proposal was a complete shock to him. Olak was sure that her stubbornness did not matter, because everything happens only by his will. He created this world, and he himself decides who lives and who dies. He couldn't believe that she thought she was free to choose her own destiny. He reminded her that they were all just puppets in the hands of a higher power, and their destinies were written in advance. Olak continued that if he wanted her to live, she would live, and if he decided that she should die, her death would not matter. Such was the will of the gods. He was stunned by her delusions, believing that she possessed some special power that could change her destiny. But in his eyes, she remained simply part of a greater design. Nomi did not give up, and looking at him resolutely reminded him that the Holy Scriptures say that God created man and gave him a will. Every person has the right to choose. Olak, with a cold expression on his face, replied that this was precisely his will. She was his wife, and this was not her will. He had decided everything, and she could not refuse her destiny. If she doubted this, he offered to convince her of her weakness, showing that there was no other way than the one he had outlined for her. She had to understand who was in power here. He was sure that she wanted to help these people, but in his opinion, her actions were doomed to failure. He believed that she wanted to give back to the village what the people had lost, but her efforts were in vain. He was right. He offered her that if she stayed here, he could restore the village's lost riches, like the water they so desperately needed, but she would have to pay for it. Olak offered her a choice whether she would consider whether it was really worth changing people's fates. He gave her a chance to think, but he knew that her decision would be tied to his terms. However, as always, he had conditions. For his help, someone had to die. He believed that in the world of God there is no place for unpunished actions, and sacrifice is inevitable. Olak challenged her to see if she could change the fate of people if she decided to stay. He was sure that she would not be able to do so without his intervention, and that her help would be too little. He thought it was all supposed to be funny for her. Nomi was determined, saying that she would never risk people's lives to save herself. Olak calmly replied that she should calm down because no one gave her the right to choose. It was too great a luxury for him to have the right to choose and decide the fate of others. He hinted that if she did not agree to his terms, she would lose everything that was dear to her, and her attempts to change anything would only lead to more grief for her and her loved ones. He assured her that he always kept his promises, even if it broke her heart. He would always be honest with her because it was his will, and her life depended on it. Olak told her that she should rest and wished her good dreams. Soon he left, leaving her alone with the thoughts she now had to endure. He reminded her that she must now fight his prophecy. When they met again, everything would be decided, and she would not be able to escape what was destined for her. When Nomi opened her eyes, she saw Pierre standing in front of her. She couldn't understand what was happening and why he was the one who greeted her and not someone else at that moment. Pierre apologetically said that he was passing by and heard her scream. He wanted to make sure she was okay and handed her the gloves, wishing her good night. Nomi asked him to stop, not understanding why he had appeared again and what had happened. She could not understand why everything had suddenly changed and why she had met him again in this strange place. Pierre, hearing her request, stopped, and at that moment stones began to fall from the ceiling. Nomi screamed in horror, her thoughts pierced by the worry that this could be related to Olak's game. She panicked, thinking that it was Olak who had started his game, trying to force her to make a choice, interfering with her life and destiny. Pierre, however, was stunned and could not understand why the ceiling had suddenly decided to collapse. Pierre, having recovered a little, said that she should not worry too much about it. He assured her that it was only an accident and that everything would be fine if she was more careful about her actions. He suggested that she try to ignore the incident and not attach too much importance to what was happening. Nomi, despite the words of comfort, remained tense and could not get rid of the feeling of anxiety. Nomi, however, was a little embarrassed and decided to ask Pierre if they could stay a few more days. She realized that she was not ready to leave right away and needed time to figure out what was happening. Pierre, frowning slightly, said that he hoped they weren't serious about him agreeing to her request. He reminded them that he knew why she was in this situation and that she had no right to ask for forgiveness for her mistakes. Pierre sighed and added that it was good that she understood her role and her mistakes. That was why he thought it would be better for her to leave this place before her actions led to even greater consequences. Pierre, his voice growing heavier, said that her anger and suffering were inevitable, as all this was as inevitable as the fate that Olak had predicted for her. He was sure that neither she nor anyone else would be able to escape it. Nomi responded with a firm statement that she could no longer live as she had before by doing nothing and allowing fate to follow the path that was destined for her. She knew that she had to do something to change the course of events. She rushed after him full of determination and asked Pierre to let her do everything in her power to change the outcome of events while she was there. She knew that her power could help, but she could not figure out how exactly to use it. Noemi told Pierre that she wanted to use her ability to find exactly what the villagers needed most. She knew this was her chance to help, and she had to take it. She added that she did not need forgiveness, that Pierre could be angry with her and curse her, but she was not going to pretend that she had not made mistakes in the past. She would act in spite of her guilt. Meanwhile, Theo sat on the steps and thought about how he had yelled at Nomi that those people were just using her while he was trying to help her. Now he realized that he himself was wrong, but he still couldn't understand why he felt so bad. Theo wondered if maybe he had used her too, even though he had tried to protect her. But something inside him made him feel guilty, like he had done something terrible, even if his intentions were good. Theo wondered if he could be angry at her for wanting to sacrifice herself for others again. He knew that her behavior was her choice, and maybe he shouldn't be angry at her decision. Theo was sure she was being an idiot, and he didn't know how to feel about her actions. He knew that he and Nomi had a strictly business relationship, but he still couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness about her. He couldn't understand why his heart suddenly started beating faster when the conversation turned to her. His thoughts were confused. Everything inside him was turning over, leaving him confused. This feeling was unfamiliar to him, and even a little frightening, like something inexplicable. He remembered her telling him that she had once experienced true freedom, but now she felt as if she had been locked within four walls again, deprived of the joys she was accustomed to, of what gave her confidence and warmth. This feeling tormented her from within. Gradually, he began to understand her thoughts about her feelings became more and more distinct, and when he heard a strange sound, it confused him. Perhaps it was in this sound that some sign was hidden that he could not yet decipher. According to legend, this sound was the cry of the oasis, but he knew very well that this was just an ancient legend. However, everything inside him cried out for a solution, and he could not help but think about the source of this mysterious sound. Theo even considered lying down on the ground and listening to its rustling, as if hoping that the earth itself would tell him its secrets. The mystery beckoned him, and the desire to know the truth grew, despite his attempts to ignore it. He pushed the thought aside, deciding that there was no time for that now. It was more important to apologize to her. The main thing was to express his feelings sincerely and open his heart so that she would understand how he really felt about her. As he climbed the stairs, he tried to mentally repeat the apology he hoped to say. He knew it might seem trite, but it was important to him that she see his sincere regret. Suddenly he realized that these were not just words. He really wanted to apologize and show that he was truly sorry, and he remembered how his grandmother taught him that important things should be done on time. She always told him that broken promises and debts are returned later with additional difficulties, so he realized that he had to apologize right away before his sense of sincerity disappeared. When he entered, his attention was drawn to Pierre's thing lying on the floor. This surprised him because he did not expect to meet Pierre in this place. It looked unusual and raised many questions in his head. Looking at the girl who was standing in tears and seeing all this chaos, he screamed, spilling his emotions on Pierre. Everything inside him was boiling, and he did not hold back his words, showering Pierre with accusations and insults. Nomi begged him to stop trying to explain that things weren't as he thought. Her voice was worried and desperate, and she begged him to just listen before jumping to conclusions. At this point, a piece of the ceiling fell on Pierre, suddenly causing danger. He found himself under the rubble and was unable to get out on his own. The situation became increasingly alarming. Pierre, trying to remain calm, said that he had simply come to return something important to him. Perhaps this explained his actions, but for Theo, it was not a sufficient justification. Pierre also warned Nomi that if she decided to stay here, he would not stop her. It was her right and her choice, and he would accept any decision she made no matter what it meant for him. He also reminded her that their secret about her holiness could cause danger if people found out about it. The locals might take it the wrong way and want to get rid of them to protect themselves. Theo asked if she really had decided to stay here. This decision could have far-reaching consequences, not only for her, but for everyone involved with her. Nomi admitted that she was attracted to the idea of finding a source of water. She believed that it would open up new possibilities for the land and make it fertile, which could change the lives of many. Theo tried to convince her of the danger of such an act, but she begged him to give her 4 days to try to find what she was looking for. There was determination and confidence in her voice. She assured that she would be careful and make sure that no one would get hurt because of her search. This chance was her last hope and an opportunity to change everything. Theo remembered that when he proposed to her, he promised her the freedom to be herself, and she treasured that promise as never before, appreciating every moment of her new existence. But now Noemi no longer wanted to be a saint. She was no longer interested in the honors and flowers that were showered upon her. She wanted to live her own life, make her own choices free from prejudice. She begged Theo to give her those 4 days so she could try to find a life that would bring happiness to both of them. For her, this was a chance to change everything for the better. Even though she knew she should have apologized to him, her desire was so strong that she couldn't stop, consumed by her desire for her dream and freedom. He came to ask her for forgiveness, but his words sounded too formal, as if he was speaking just for the sake of it, and he himself felt it, realizing that a different approach was needed. Despite his doubts, he agreed to her request and promised that they would leave this place in 4 days. She was grateful to him and sincerely happy for his support. Pierre, noticing the change, asked in surprise if Theo had changed his mind and was going to join them. He was curious about what had changed during this time. Noemi replied that Theo had decided to think about the future for now. He was not ready to make a final decision and preferred to think things over in private. She knew Theo was frustrated and angry, and she doubted he would come anytime soon. He needed to sort himself out. Pierre wondered why Theo continued to stay here, even though his presence seemed to be of little use. Maybe he was more attached to this place than he realized. Even with the changes that had happened to him, Pierre saw something new in Theo that intrigued him. He asked Noemi why Theo did not leave and what kept him there. Pierre noted that no one could predict what would happen next. He wondered how her special gift could help in finding water in these arid lands. He was a little worried that she might start to perceive people as temple worshippers, but her enthusiasm at his words left him a little confused and surprised. Noemi perked up and asked if she could use her gift to peer into the future of the people they interacted with. She believed it would help her understand the path. She was sure that through visions, she would be able to determine where to look for a source of water in order to restore fertility to these lands and help all the inhabitants. Pierre was afraid that Noemi's request might reveal the secret, and that would only complicate their situation. He did not know how to explain her gift to those around him. Noemi suggested looking at each person's future separately, hoping that this would help determine which people could help her in her search for water. Pierre was at a loss for words, but he could see her energy and determination showing through. He knew that people like her had always attracted Theo, perhaps because of her tenacity. He tried to support her so that she could connect with people without disturbing their peace, without revealing her uniqueness. She tried to figure out how to proceed, trying to feel the right decision through contact with people, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to find an answer, and this began to cause doubts in her soul. Her visions began to show a future where everything ends in death. She could not accept that in order to obtain water it would require the sacrifice of lives. This thought weighed heavily on her. She was overcome with despair, for she felt that the vision of Olak's death might become reality. She was afraid that her worst fears might come true. Pierre warned her to be careful, reminding her that the earth takes those who delve too deeply into its mysteries. His words made her think. When he lightly touched her hand, it suddenly became clear to her that he too could die. She could not hide her fear, and Pierre caught this fear on her face. Pierre saw the change in her face and asked what had alarmed her. So he did not understand what she was seeing, but he sincerely wanted to know what had caused this fear in her. Noemi, without hiding the truth, admitted that she saw only death for everyone in the future. Her words alarmed Pierre, making him wonder about the meaning of her visions. Pierre realized that her gift did not help find water or show the way to salvation. Rather, her visions warned of the danger lurking along the way. She wasn't sure if her visions were about finding water. Perhaps they were warning of another threat, something darker than they had imagined. Pierre, lost in thought, asked her if there was another way to find a solution. At that moment, something significant came to mind. She remembered the time she had kissed Theo, and the future had been revealed to her. She thought that perhaps if she did it again, she would be able to see more important details. Explaining her thought, she said that a kiss could penetrate deeper into her visions and reveal new fragments of the future that were otherwise inaccessible. Noemi was determined that the kiss might be her only chance to understand the hidden secrets. It was her last resort to get answers. Meanwhile, Theo, not knowing where she was, tried to find her. He was sure that she was still here and had not left this place without a reason. He continued searching, but did not find her. At some point, children ran up to him, offering him to play with them, hoping that he would agree to take his mind off things. Theo replied regretfully that he was busy, and the children, realizing that he would not be with them, began to play on their own. His refusal slightly upset them, but they quickly returned to their games. Theo said that he was busy, so they should play without him and leave already. The boy noticed that he had been standing there for a long time. They said that he had a bad character. Well, it was true. They thought that their poor older sister who had married him. They were happily playing with the ball, laughing and forgetting about everything, but suddenly someone unexpectedly stopped the game. It was so unexpected that everyone immediately turned around trying to understand what had happened. The man said that he was bored watching the game and suggested that they play together. The children looked at him curiously, hoping that the game would now become even more interesting. Pierre, surprised by his proposal, asked again if he had understood correctly and if she was going to kiss the locals to see their future. It sounded strange and even shocked him. Nomi nodded affirmatively and confirmed his words. She was not completely sure about this method, but she thought that kissing would help her see more, as it happened when she did it with Mr. Theo. She was sure that if she started kissing people, she would be able to see the future, and that it would be useful. Pierre was shocked. He couldn't believe that she actually suggested that. It seemed strange and out of place. Pierre, surprised by her suggestion, noted that people usually exchange kisses as a sign of politeness or joy at meeting, but this was not at all what she was talking about. He did not understand how this could help in the search. He couldn't understand why she would even suggest such a thing. Kissing a married woman is impossible, Pierre said, trying to find some logic in her decision. It was not only strange, but morally unacceptable. Nomi tried to explain to him that her intention was not what he thought. She wanted to use kisses to see the future, not for any personal reasons. Pierre wasn't sure she understood the seriousness of the situation. In Ceylon, she is just an ordinary person, no different from others. There are certain rules and laws that must be respected and followed regardless of personal preferences or situations. Nomi, trying to explain her situation, said that she simply had no other way to act. But the man, clearly not entirely satisfied with this explanation, asked, could she not find another way? 553. The girl, hearing his words, became upset and thought deeply. She did not want to give up and firmly answered that she would try to find another option. The man noticed her determination, but in his heart he doubted whether she was really doing this for their common good. Was the girl really so determined to do this? He wanted to believe in her sincerity, but his doubts still remained. He remembered his friend's words, who said that it was not her fault at all that she was in this situation. Her family had forced her to act the way she did, and she had no choice but to follow the imposed rules which she might not have agreed with. So the man, after weighing everything, told her that if she really needed to go through this ordeal, and if she had the courage, then she could do it with him and not with strangers. The girl asked again, asking if she had understood his proposal correctly. He replied that he lived here in Ceylon, and therefore it should work as in the case of any other local resident. The man, although he offered his help, still had doubts. He suspected that although she would be able to fulfill her plan, it would hardly bring her pleasure. Mutual feelings were confused, and it was difficult for both of them to understand each other. Nomi, upon hearing his proposal, confidently stated that she was ready to take this step and that she was sincerely grateful to him for his support. There was determination in her voice, and although it was not easy for her, she still felt indebted to him. Pierre tried to stop her, realizing that the consequences could be unpredictable, but it was too late. She had decided, and he didn't even know how to feel about it. He could only watch and hope for the best developments. The girl, looking into the distance, saw water approaching her. She felt that she would soon meet someone important, and this person would be able to help her on the way to the goal that became the meaning of her life. She also saw a brighter future for the man who was next to her. In her visions, she felt that he might stay with her for a long time, and they would be together, which brought her unexpected joy and a sense of peace. She also saw Theo holding the relic, and the vision did not end there. She saw that she would have children with him in the future. This vision overwhelmed her, and she felt its significance. Pierre, seeing how she was absorbed in her thoughts, asked her to wait a little, as he felt embarrassed and did not know how to react to what he had seen. He needed time to comprehend everything. Nomi, still under the impression of the vision, reported that she saw a future with a husband and children, and that she did not understand why she saw her future through him. Her amazement grew, and she did not find answers, but it didn't matter. Now. The main thing was that she had found water, confident that its source was somewhere in the cave. She wanted to check it out and hoped that her intuition would not fail her. At that moment they met. Noemi ran to him to talk, but Theo, seeing her with Pierre, realized that they had spent all this time together. His gaze was incomprehensible, but he said nothing. Theo asked her where they were because he thought they were supposed to check the residence. To this the girl replied that she saw the water she had long dreamed of. Her words sounded more confident than ever. The girl claimed that the source of water was in a cave, and she was sure that she had seen it. But Pierre objected, pointing out that there was no cave or underground source nearby. His words made her think. Theo didn't immediately understand what was happening, but Pierre explained that she was assuring everyone that the water was underground. Her conviction was strong, but Theo himself seemed surprised by this. The girl was perplexed because she thought she saw water. However, Pierre continued to doubt, and her faith began to waver despite the visions that had always come true before. She remembered the prophecy of a man who would one day create an oasis on this site, but someone would have to sacrifice themselves to do so. She considered the possibility in her mind. The thought of sacrifice troubled her because she did not want deaths, but perhaps without it, it would be impossible to gain access to the cave, which made her confused and afraid of the upcoming choice. Theo, seeing her torment, suggested that they try to find a similar place. He also reminded everyone that Nomi was never wrong in her premonitions, and that they should trust her visions. Theo suggested that Nomi think carefully about everything, because perhaps her visions contain clues that will help find the right path to the cherished goal and avoid fatal consequences. Pierre, realizing the significance of her predictions, wondered if there was danger in them. He felt that the future she spoke of was just around the corner, but he was unsure whether it was worth the risk. Nomi shared that it seemed like finding the cave required sacrifice. She felt like the journey was fraught with challenges, and this realization made her question her decisions. Her vision was about death taking lives, and Theo asked her point blank if she was sure of that. He wanted to hear her answer so he could figure out how to proceed. Theo also mentioned that if she rechecked the vision, it might change. However, Pierre was indignant because his friend had just claimed that her predictions were always correct. Pierre suggested that if a sacrifice was necessary, then perhaps only one person was needed. To this, the lady asked in surprise what he meant, trying to understand his train of thought. Pierre had an idea. He suggested that he be the one to be sacrificed. Theo was shocked and asked why Pierre was willing to take such a step, which seemed unheard of. Pierre explained that he considered it his duty to take advantage of the life that had once been saved for him. He was ready to give himself for the common good, even if it required incredible courage. 7 years ago, Pierre found himself in the war and fought to the last. But when his strength began to leave him, he realized that his life was hanging by a thread. This realization horrified him. He finally lost his strength, and when he fell, he began to realize that he probably would not survive. He felt that he was dying, and this was the moment of extreme pain. Lying on the ground, he heard footsteps. Knowing that if he lost consciousness, it would all be over, he fought to the last, hoping that he would be able to stay alive in this desperate situation. Pierre slowly opened his eyes. His consciousness was foggy, and he did not immediately understand where he was. There were some muffled conversations around, as if people were discussing something important. But he tried to focus his gaze, but everything in front of him was as if in a fog. Eventually, the words began to make sense. He heard Theo's voice saying that he might have wanted to leave him here, but he had helped bring him here anyway. The lady comforted Theo, assuring him that he had done the right thing in helping. Pierre tried to comprehend what was happening, and it seemed to him that he saw people whom he considered enemies. However, his body seemed to have turned to stone. He could not even move a finger. Thoughts flowed slowly, as if they were under a heavy veil of sleep. After much effort, he finally managed to come to his senses. The people around him gave him water to drink so that he could regain his strength. Pierre took a deep breath. promising himself that he would definitely thank them for the kindness shown to him in his hour of need. The lady, hearing his promise, nodded approvingly, adding that she hoped that Pierre's gratitude would find her in the near future. Her voice sounded insistent, as if there was some hidden request behind these words. And if there was no gratitude, she said that Pierre would have to pay, and not just with a kind word, with interest. Her eyes sparkled, hinting that this was about something more serious than just a promise. Theo, who had been watching the conversation, could not understand why his great-aunt would want interest from Pierre, and the debt itself seemed strange. He knew her as a woman of principles, but even he was not clear what exactly she meant. However, Theo soon turned to Pierre, explaining that the debt belonged to him, not his grandmother Theo, clearly considered this a matter of principle, and looked at Pierre as if he was obliged to fulfill the terms of this agreement. Theo angrily told Pierre to stop talking nonsense and getting distracted by trivialities. He realized that Pierre probably intended to deal with him for something, and this thought seriously worried him. However, their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected cry. Someone began to drown in the quicksand nearby. Everyone immediately tensed up, realizing the seriousness of what was happening, and for a while forgot about their differences. It turned out to be a boy desperately sobbing, begging for help. His voice trembled with terror, and he asked to be saved, clinging to every sound around him. Without thinking twice, Pierre threw him a rope and shouted for the boy to grab it. Time was running out, and every moment could be fatal for him. They all rushed to help, realizing that salvation was near. They needed to pull the boy out, but to their horror, the rope wouldn't budge, as if it was being held by an invisible force. Something was stopping them from helping him out of the sand, and they began to panic. At that moment, Nomi heard a strange voice seemingly out of nowhere. The voice mockingly spoke of how fascinating it was to watch people fear death, experiencing a whole range of emotions in the face of the inevitable. The voice then invited Nomi to take a look at this show, explaining that this is why he can't stop making such scenes, because people's fear is his source of inspiration. The same voice spoke to Nomi again, reminding her how much he missed his wife, and suddenly a wild wind arose. The whirlwind was so powerful that it almost knocked her off her feet, and she could not understand what was happening. Nomi didn't understand anything about what was happening, but the voice kept calling her to him, claiming that she was his wife. The words sounded ominous and enticing, making her retreat, but she felt something pulling her towards him. Meanwhile, the woman nearby begged Theo and Pierre to do something to protect her from the unfamiliar voice that was getting louder. Nomi, realizing that she couldn't cope alone, decided to call Theo and Pierre for help. However, no matter how hard she tried, they didn't hear her, as if there was an invisible wall between them. The voice continued to speak, advising her not to waste her energy in vain, because there was no way for them to get out of there, and people would not be able to see them as long as they remained here in this place. The voice pushed her to despair, convincing her that it was better for her to give up and let the boy die, because she was seeing him for the first time and had nothing in common with him. He added that the boy had no idea she existed until they met by chance here in this desert, where no one knew each other. The boy's death seemed so insignificant to the voice that it suggested that she take this chance to find water and save her strength. After all people die sooner or later, the voice said, claiming that it was natural and inevitable, and perhaps the best way out was to simply accept this fact. Death will come for everyone, the voice continued, but Nomi could not accept this outcome. She thought about it, and her heart was breaking with fear for the boy's fate. The words of the chief archbishop, who had once said that Nomi Belen would become the wife of God, suddenly appeared in her mind, and this prophecy echoed in her soul. At that moment, Nomi began to pray, turning to God and asking him to let her go. She explained that she wanted to live, that she was not ready to die, and did not want to be someone's victim. She said that she could not accept this outcome, and this statement clearly surprised Olak, who expected a different reaction from her. She added that no one can ever come to terms with the idea of death, no matter how long and fulfilling their life was. Nomi firmly stated that it is impossible to accept the inevitability of the end. The idea that her death could be so meaningless filled her with rage. She realized that Olak was only mocking her when he spoke of a meaningless death. Now Noemi has realized that he does not exist to save people, and so she no longer intends to worship him, refusing to be his victim. She also promised herself that she would not allow him to do whatever he wanted and was ready to fight for her life to the end. So now Noemi was determined that she no longer wanted to worship him and would not allow him to do whatever he wanted. Her gaze was filled with determination, and at that moment she felt that she would never submit to his will. God, hearing her words, only grinned, surprised by her audacity. Then he calmly noted that it was not up to her to decide how her fate would turn out, since he was the creator of her life. Olak gestured towards the boy who had just escaped. He told Noemi to watch carefully because everything was happening as he wanted, and she had no power to resist it. With undisguised contempt, he added that her resistance was pointless, since he was capable of controlling the lives of others. Noemi looked at the boy and clenched her fists, deciding that she would not allow his words to become reality. She rushed towards him, breaking free from his grasp, determined that she would not let him do evil. Her heart was filled with rage and courage, and she challenged him with force, not intending to give in. In response to her determination, God only chuckled, deciding that her outburst was simply amusing. It seemed that he did not believe that her efforts could change anything, and continued to consider himself her sole master. Noemi, full of determination, rushed to the boy, hugged him, and said that she would not let him go and would help him get out of here. She firmly decided that she would do everything possible to save him. She shouted to her friends to continue pulling on the rope with redoubled force. By combining their efforts, they managed to pull the boy onto solid ground, but in the process, she herself began to sink into the quicksand. Feeling that she was now trapped, Noemi desperately tried to escape. Theo, noticing this, ran towards her, deciding that he would do everything in his power to prevent her from dying. She looked at him and said with a smile that at least she had saved the boy. There was a calm confidence in her gaze that even in this situation she had done everything right. As her consciousness began to fade, she found herself in a strange place, and there she heard the voice of God again. He mockingly told her that she was a foolish woman who had sacrificed herself because of her inability to refuse her duty. He added that her selflessness makes her attractive in his eyes because she remains true to her ideals even in the most hopeless situation. God continued to say that despite her attempts to escape her destiny, she still returned to his arms. He found this both amusing and delightful. He said he always knew she would come back because she was his dear wife, destined for him by fate itself, and that her opposition only added flavor to their connection. Olak looked at her lovingly, telling her that she would be his wife, the wife of a god. The words echoed in her mind, and Noemi tried to come to her senses. Suddenly, the divine monologue was interrupted by Theo's voice calling her and desperately trying to reach her. She looked back and saw Theo holding onto the rope, reaching out his hand to her. Theo, without thinking, grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, trying to pull her out of the quicksand. Seeing him, Noemi was happy and felt her heart filled with hope again. God watched this scene in amazement, not understanding how such a non-entity as Theo dared to interfere in his affairs and hinder his will. Olak was furious, outraged that this man dared to take away his wife, who was destined for him, and even helped her in her fight against him. He angrily reminded Theo that he was just a man walking the path that God himself had laid out for him, and he had no right to do such things. God ordered Noemi to stop resisting and simply submit, assuring her that her struggle was pointless and that it was better to surrender. Noemi, without flinching, firmly declared that she would not give in. Now that she had tasted life, she decided to fight to the end, rejecting the role of a victim. God, hearing her words gloomily, told her to try to live her life, but warned that soon she would experience pain and regret her choice. Noemi, despite his threats, was very worried about Theo. She asked if he was okay, grateful for his dedication and help. Theo chuckled and replied that he should have been asking her about her condition since she had just escaped from a death trap. Noemi couldn't help but feel worried, wondering what he would do if he himself was in danger, but he replied that he didn't think about it, he just acted. Then, with a smile, Theo joked that if he had died, at least his funeral would have taken place in the capital, and Noemi could not help but smile, admiring his courage. At that moment, the lady drew their attention to the horizon, where a blue stripe was flickering. She pointed with her hand and said that there very close they could find water. Theo and Nomi looked where the lady was pointing and noticed a blue line on the horizon. It took them a moment to realize that it was indeed water. This discovery gave them strength because they had been walking for a long time in search of the source and finally found it. Nomi felt energized and grateful that they had gotten to this point together. She looked at Theo with deep respect and joy for always being there, helping her and supporting her, even when things seemed impossible. In front of them was the same water that Nomi had seen in her visions. She froze, then slowly sank to her knees, feeling both relief and joy. Theo, noticing her condition, worriedly asked if she was okay. Nomi just nodded, smiling through her tears because she was incredibly happy. They actually did it. They reached the water. It wasn't just Olak who was wrong, but her own doubts as well. She was able to find water and no one died along the way. Nomi realized that the future she saw was not the only possible outcome and that humans were not puppets in the hands of the gods. Now she no longer had to live with thoughts of sacrifice and a fate over which she had no control. The realization of this overwhelmed her with emotion, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Theo looked at her with slight bewilderment, and seeing her happiness didn't know how to react. To support her, he sat down next to her, gently hugged her, and gently suggested that she go to the others to share this victory with them. Pierre prepared special equipment to scoop up water and carry it to the village. Everything went well and cold water splashed on him and Theo, filling them with joy. Seeing this, Nomi again felt incredible relief and joy that overwhelmed her to the depths of her soul. Pierre, watching them, jokingly remarked that she really was an amazing woman because she managed to make Theo jump into quicksand, risking himself. He noted that he had only known Theo to be so reckless a couple of times in his life. Theo replied that he simply knew nothing would happen to him and smiled confidently. Pierre couldn't understand where this confidence came from and assumed that it was also part of their prophecy. In a sense, he was right. Theo replied that he had a good reason for this, and that reason was Nomi herself. He admitted that under other circumstances, he would not have taken such a risk, and Nomi smiled, realizing that he truly believed in her. Pierre, a little surprised, realized that she really helped Theo believe in his strength and everything that awaited them. In his heart, he was grateful to her for this, and thinking about it, he realized that he had been wrong towards her. He decided that if he could not express his gratitude, he would at least ask forgiveness for his mistakes. At first he felt awkward, but then he apologized for misunderstanding her and being rude. Pierre said that her noble actions showed him a truly kind heart, and this changed his attitude towards her. Approaching Nomi, he bowed his head respectfully, thanking her for saving the entire village and their hope for life. Nomi, accepting his apology, turned to Madame, who brought them food and water, rejoicing at their successful return. She thanked the woman for everything and said that, thanks to her help, they were able to perform this miracle, giving the villagers the long-awaited water. Nomi noticed that the water would now be not just a salvation for them, but a symbol of a new beginning. The woman hugged her with gratitude, conveying her sincere joy for their salvation. An elderly resident recalled how the child was on the verge of death and praised Nomi for her bravery, noting her kind heart. She said that the villagers would bless her with all their hearts for her further travels and for her bright path. Nomi thanked him for these words, feeling for the first time that her journey had not been in vain and that the blessing given with kindness now had a special meaning. The woman noticed that her husband was already waiting to go to the lake and greet the others, leaving Nomi and Theo alone. They looked at each other, realizing that after everything they had been through, they needed to talk. They began to speak at the same time, each wanting to express his confession to the other. Theo was the first to apologize for being harsh and rude, realizing that he had sometimes misjudged her intentions and doubted her strength. Nomi smiled and replied that she herself wanted to apologize because her words and accusations were sometimes unfair. She admitted that she regretted what she said in anger and that his support along the way was most important to her. Theo was touched by her words and nodded, agreeing that their journey together had helped them understand a lot and become stronger. They sat by the fire for a long time, feeling that their relationship had now reached a new level and that in the future they would be able to rely on each other in any trials. The night was warm and calm around them, and everyone understood that their adventures together did not end there. Nomi and Theo exchanged looks of trust and gratitude. A new chapter of life awaited them, filled with faith and confidence in their path. Nomi looked at Theo with a soft smile, feeling that despite all the trials their union had become stronger. She finally felt that she had support, and not only physically, but also spiritually. Theo, in turn, looked at her with genuine respect, realizing how much she had been through. His heart filled with pride for her strength and determination because she was able to overcome everything despite all the doubts and fears. The lady was surprised when she saw how much the villagers gave them. They presented them with many gifts, trying to express their gratitude. It was unexpectedly generous. Pierre said he had difficulty stopping the villagers who were going to bring them palm trees. He knew it was a difficult journey and did not want to burden them with unnecessary things. Theo wondered if he really wanted them to carry all that. He was a little dissatisfied with the amount of gifts since the journey was long and difficult. Pierre replied that they had a long way to go and that everything would be useful. There weren't many things here, and his friend was strong and could carry heavy things. Theo looked at Pierre in surprise. He noticed that Pierre and the camel had the same face, which made the latter laugh. Pierre noted that he had no doubts about his camel, but how he himself was supposed to climb on it was a question. Pierre patted Theo on the shoulder and told him to walk so he could exercise his legs at the same time. Theo looked at him, not understanding how he had been offered such a difficult alternative. Nomi said goodbye to the residents. They promised to see her again, and were very happy that everything ended so well. She thanked them for their help and smiled. Suddenly they noticed that Pierre was following them. The guy asked why he was following them. Theo looked at him in bewilderment, waiting for an explanation. Pierre said that the capital was still days away. The road was difficult and he could not leave their saviors without help. Theo was not sure that he should help, but he still agreed. Pierre added that if they encountered bandits, Theo alone would not be enough. Theo replied that he had already passed through this area twice and was not afraid of bandits. Pierre countered that he had been in this area much more often and reminded him that Theo had told him to fuck off. Theo winced, unsure of how best to handle this situation. Pierre added that everything was fine. There was no need to refuse his help. He had plenty of free time, and it would not be difficult for him to support them on the road. The lady was already very tired of this journey. Pierre noticed that she was bored, and if so, he could tell her some funny story to cheer her up. Nomi didn't refuse, and they started laughing loudly. Theo didn't know what to make of it, but he noticed that she began to trust Pierre more, even though she had been with him a few days ago. Theo watched them and noticed that they seemed to have become best friends. This irritated him. He decided to turn away so as not to look at this too open atmosphere. Soon Theo said that there was a meadow not far from the capital. He said that they would get there in 2 days, and it would be a great place to stop and rest. Theo suggested that they take a swim and rest before continuing on their way. It was a nice place to spend the night, and he hoped that everyone would be able to relax a bit. Pierre agreed, except that snakes often appeared here. Theo was surprised and asked again how one could rest peacefully in such a place if there were snakes there. Pierre reassured him that for him the hissing of a snake was like thunder and he would notice it from meters away. Theo in turn was not sure but still felt relieved. Pierre suggested that the lady should tell him if she saw any crawling creatures, as he would be able to deal with them. Nomi agreed with relief and promised to be attentive. She sat down, unpacking the bag of things, but she did not manage to do it right away. Theo noticed that she was trying and decided to help, taking the bag from her to open it. The lady was grateful for the help. She thanked Theo when he opened the bag. Then she went into the tent, feeling that she still had a lot of work ahead of her. Theo helped her out of the tent and she thanked him again. She felt a little embarrassed, but she still appreciated his help. Their relationship grew closer with each passing day. She started chopping wood, but Theo noticed that she might hurt herself if she continued chopping. He came over and gently suggested that she change her method to avoid injury. At that moment, Pierre came up and said that it was dangerous to do that and that she needed to hold the axe in a different way. He explained that it would be difficult at first, but she would quickly get used to it. Nomi was surprised, but she listened to him. Pierre noted that it would be difficult for her, but she would gradually learn and soon she would be able to chop wood without difficulty. Nomi said that she saw them, but Theo didn't understand what she meant. He was puzzled by her words, but decided not to interfere in the conversation and just watched what was happening. The girl explained that she saw this moment during her kiss with Mr. Pierre. Theo asked again what it meant, and Pierre was very scared, not knowing how to react. Theo was at a loss, not understanding what she meant. Pierre responded nervously. Not wanting to continue this conversation, Nomi, in turn, tried to diffuse the atmosphere. The girl said that during her kiss with Mr. Pierre, she saw this moment. Theo asked again what it meant, and Pierre was very scared, not knowing how to react. Theo was at a loss, not understanding what she meant. Pierre remained silent in horror, afraid that his words could cause a misunderstanding. Theo asked her when she saw it. The lady immediately fell silent, as she had completely forgotten that Theo was not aware of this situation. She was confused because this information should not have reached him. The lady had completely forgotten because Mr. Theo didn't know about it. She felt awkward and realized that she needed to explain somehow, but she didn't know where to start because it was all quite awkward. Pierre immediately rushed to explain that she had to do it that day to look into the future. He hastened to assure Theo that the kiss he thought was not what he thought and had no meaning. Theo said he had enough explanations and would go to the lake. Everyone was surprised by his decision, but no one objected. Theo added that he would go alone, and Pierre immediately realized that the situation would become even more complicated. Theo also said that he would go himself. Pierre realized that he had no chance as the situation had become very tense. Theo was going to go without them, and Pierre felt that he could not influence what was happening. Theo washed himself and thought about how she was one of those who was capable of the most unpredictable things. He wondered how she could show such unexpected and sometimes strange behavior. It was confusing, and he did not know how to react. Instead of asking for a kiss, she asked to sleep with him. This surprised Theo because not only did she avoid romantic gestures, but she immediately suggested something much more intimate and unexpected. But that was before they talked about their marriage, and it seemed that everything was not real. The lady did not feel the real feelings that should be in marriage. She realized that everything that happened between them did not have a deep meaning. She was not his wife, and there was no point in pretending that she was. Their relationship had no basis for real affection. The marriage was a formality, the result of a business contract, not love. That's right, they have a contract marriage, and they are not in a relationship where they can exchange feelings. The contract was based on personal gain, and both understood that there could be no romance between them. It's just a contract that benefits both of them. He entered into this marriage for the sake of the heirloom, not for the sake of feelings. She was looking for a husband, but she realized that he was not suitable for the role of a real-life partner. The same goes for her. She wants to find a husband, and he is not suitable for this role. For her, their relationship was nothing more than a contract. He was not a man with whom she would want to tie her life for love. She just kissed him. There is nothing wrong with that. She is sure that the kiss does not change their relationship because they were not bound by love. All this, in her opinion, will not destroy their marriage because it is not real. Nomi apologized to Mr. Pierre. She didn't want to tell him. She felt that hiding the kiss in front of Theo wasn't the best decision, but at the same time she didn't know what to do in this situation. But the man thought that now was the best time to apologize to Theo. Pierre thought that hiding this moment from Theo was a mistake. He thought that frankness was more important than any hidden feelings and doubts. The lady thought it would be worthwhile to go and tell him that it was for the sake of a prediction. She thought that if she explained to Theo the reason for the kiss, he would understand that it was all just part of looking into the future. And he added that after all, a kiss is a kiss. Pierre noted that kisses are only for lovers, and they cannot be just a gesture without any meaning. It was an important remark that made the lady think. The lady asked again what he was talking about. She did not quite understand what Pierre meant. He explained that people in love always kiss, and this is not an accident but an important event in the relationship. Pierre said that he and Theo, for example, were in love. This statement surprised the lady. She did not expect Pierre to speak so openly and confidently about the feelings between Theo and himself. Nomi was surprised that they were in love. She couldn't understand how that was possible. Pierre was surprised by her reaction because it was obvious to him they were engaged and even ran away for the sake of their love. The lady did not understand at all what he was talking about. She was confused, but Pierre explained that she was not indifferent to Theo. She wanted to be with him, and when her heart beat, she felt like it was about to burst. He believed that she had exactly the same feelings with Theo. Pierre was sure that the lady felt love for Theo, and that was why they decided to get married. This was an unexpected revelation for her, although she could not admit it. The lady wanted to say something, but then she remarked that she had to see Mr. Theo. She was full of doubts and thoughts, but she decided that before continuing the conversation, she needed to talk to Theo to clarify everything. After that, she went to the lake and thought that she cared about him and wanted to know about him, to be with him, to hug him, to touch him. These thoughts occupied her mind, and she could not get rid of them, as if it had become a part of her feelings. And when she actually touches him, she feels like her heart is about to break. These feelings were new and uncertain for her, but she felt that this was perhaps love, although she was not yet sure of it. It was love then she saw him in the lake. At that moment when she saw him, all doubts disappeared. She realized that it was truly love, and her heart fluttered with excitement. She felt that she had finally found him. She called the master and was glad that she had finally found him. Her voice sounded with delight, and her heart was overflowing with joy because she felt that their paths had finally crossed. Theo asked her to wait, to stand there and not approach him. He seemed a little surprised and worried by her approach. She did not immediately understand why he was reacting this way, but soon understood his request. The lady didn't understand what was going on, and then she realized that he was naked. The moment she realized why Theo was asking her to wait, she immediately apologized, feeling that she had gone too far without knowing his condition. Theo first said that he took off his clothes to go for a swim. He was a little embarrassed, but still said that he did not know that she would come at that moment. Nomi was ready to explain her intentions, and her words became sincere and decisive. Pierre was a little upset and was preparing himself something to eat, trying to distract himself from his thoughts. He was worried about the woman who had left everything for love. This decision seemed so dramatic to him, but he couldn't understand what was behind her actions. He didn't understand why she was asking him such questions. Why was she asking if they were in love? The question seemed strange to him because their relationship was built on something else. He couldn't grasp the meaning of her doubts. It seemed that she really didn't understand what love was. He tried to reason about it, but his thoughts were confused. At that moment, he heard the sound of a snake, and all his attention switched to this unexpected and disturbing sound. Suddenly, a horse charged at him and knocked him off his feet. He was confused and did not understand what was happening, trying only to understand what kind of nightmare he was experiencing. He asked for silence, trying to regain control of the situation. Pierre noticed that the snake was frightening the camels too, and he didn't understand at all when it had managed to crawl so close. He was puzzled by this feeling, his heart pounding wildly with fear, but he couldn't allow himself to panic. In a panic, he grabbed the spear, determined to act. He was ready to do anything to protect himself and those around him. The snake had become a threat, and Pierre could not allow it to harm him. Theo asked her again, not sure if he had understood correctly. The lady repeated the question again, explaining that she wanted to know if there were real feelings between them, if love was as she imagined it. She added that it would be weird to kiss someone if there were no mutual feelings. It seemed like there was something more to them than just commitment, but she still wasn't sure she understood their relationship correctly. Nomi was confused. She knew they didn't love each other, but why did she feel the way she did? Why was this strange internal conflict haunting her? The gentleman was sure that she had come to say that she forbade him to be angry with her because of the kiss with Pierre. He was ready to listen to her explanation because he knew that they had no romantic feelings, and all this was only part of their obligations. He said confidently that they were not in a relationship, that everything between them was strictly contractual. He hoped that this would calm her down and help diffuse the tension that had arisen between them after the last scene. It seemed that was exactly what she wanted to hear. He asked if his words made her feel better. He wasn't sure, but he hoped that now she would understand how everything worked and calm down. Nomi noticed that he seemed a little irritated and asked what was wrong. The gentleman replied that he was a little surprised, but it was not something shocking for him. He knew that she might be worried, but he was not prepared for such a reaction. Nomi said that Pierre wanted to save his people, and that might explain his actions. Theo added that even though their marriage worked, they still had to fulfill their marital duties. He wanted to explain that he didn't want her to misunderstand. He understood that this might be difficult for her. However, he didn't want her to think that he was insensitive to her feelings. Theo said he was just a means to an end. If she decided to kiss him to see the future, he wouldn't mind. He reached for her lips again, but he didn't know what she would do in response. He reached for her lips, hoping that she would understand his intentions. However, her reaction was unexpected. She turned away, and he did not understand why. He thought that she was tired of him, or was simply not ready for this step. He felt her turn away from him, and he didn't know how to explain it. Maybe she was genuinely tired, or maybe she just didn't want to continue, but something about her behavior made him doubt their connection. Theo mused that perhaps she didn't feel guilty and that she had nothing to regret now. She could use him when she needed to, but not now. He realized that her behavior was hiding something deeper. He decided it was time for them to go back. Everything had become too confusing and they were in danger of getting lost if they kept moving so fast. He was ready to act despite his inner doubts. Nomi thought that Theo would feel the same as she did, but she was wrong. He was sure of his path of his actions. It was a mistake on her part to assume that he would also experience the same emotions. She turned to the master, asking what had happened, because their camp had been destroyed. There was no clarity on what to do next, and she felt lost, not understanding what had happened to their plans. She pointed to the place where the enemy, the black snake, was spotted. The gentleman immediately realized that the situation was dangerous and covered her with his hand, trying to protect her. At that moment, Pierre ran up to them, warning them of new problems. Pierre shouted that they were in trouble because the horse and camels had run away. He was clearly agitated, and his words made Theo even more nervous. He immediately asked again what he had just said, trying to comprehend what was happening. Theo was horrified and asked Pierre what he had just said, trying to understand the gist of his message. Panic had taken hold of him, and he was trying to concentrate so as not to lose control of the situation. In the heresy room, Enzo opened the safe and took out the box. He knew that time was running out, and they had to be ready. Every moment was important and much depended on their actions. Time was running out. People were discussing that there was only a short time left before the light came of age, and they had to sacrifice her before she lost her virginity. This was a key event, and they couldn't afford to lose the chance. They could not understand what would happen if she lost her virginity while away from their land. The day the one who would take possession of her body came onto the scene, the consequences could be devastating. God's wrath would not leave them alone. They all agreed that their end was inevitable, so they decided to destroy Furgard, because if they did not take decisive action, the consequences would be dire. Every decision they made affected the future. The archbishop slammed the table, declaring that those who wanted the saint back should shut up unless they were prepared to act decisively. He was sure that only decisive steps could prevent a catastrophe. If they want the whole world to know that they failed to keep their promise to God, then let it be their shame. But if they keep silent, it will be easier to save face and avoid unnecessary attention. The priests believed that these proposals would destroy the reputation of the church, but the archbishop was adamant. If they wanted everything to go according to plan, they had to do it quickly and without compromise. Enzo noted that they could use the information that the followers of the powerful god Olak existed even outside the country. News of what was happening spread quickly, and they had to be proactive. Enzo continued that they could use this situation to find out the location of the saint. It was an opportunity that could not be missed. They could find her if they used the information correctly. He suggested that they send letters to neighboring countries in the name of the archbishop. This might strengthen their position and generate interest in the shrine that was so important to their mission. One terrible day, a merchant stole the god's bride, and now they need help to get her back. If they send a message like this, they will draw attention to the saint and strengthen the faith of their followers. The archbishop noted that perhaps this would help spread the word, but they had no choice but to wait. However, they had to be prepared to act as soon as the opportunity arose. Enzo added that while they were searching, they should use their trump card. It was the sinner, and the priests were astonished by his suggestion. They did not know how to react to such words. The priests couldn't understand why he was talking about a sinner. In their eyes, it looked like heresy. It went beyond what they considered acceptable. But Enzo was sure it wasn't. The priests replied that there was no sense in what he was proposing and that they were praising the devil. This was unacceptable to their religion, but Enzo was sure that they had to do otherwise. He approached Tyson, offering him that if they gave him this sinner, he would help find the god's bride. Tyson was ready to accept the challenge and help. After all, it was part of their plan. The priests objected, saying that this was heresy and that they could not support such an idea, but Enzo was unmoved. He knew that to achieve his goal, he had to act decisively, and he was prepared to face the consequences. Enzo said that they glorified only God and that they would never have any dealings with demons. It was a principle they were not going to compromise. This piece of metal was like a devil's bone. Using it would attract attention and leave their enemies with minimal chances of refusal. All this was happening during an important moment, and at that moment no one could afford to hesitate, for much more serious things were at stake. For the sake of his family and Olak, they had to do what they had planned. This was a moment when much could be sacrificed for the sake of the highest goals, despite the risks that seemed to leave no choice. He knew it had to be done. Meanwhile, the saint and her companions were moving on foot, their journey becoming even more difficult than they could have imagined. Despite all their efforts, the saint began to feel her and her companions' strength waning, and each step becoming more and more difficult. Nomi was very worried about the situation. She couldn't get along with Theo, and the problem with the missing horses and camels was only making her feel worse. She tried to find the words to fix it, but it was getting harder and harder. Pierre was very upset because the snake had come so unexpectedly, and his babies had immediately become frightened and ran in different directions. He could not calm down and felt helpless, despite everything he tried to do to get everything back under control. Theo was furious because he himself said that he was very good at catching snakes, but apparently his confidence was not justified. He was disappointed and angry at himself for not being able to cope with this situation. Nomi was hesitant to tell Theo about the pain in her legs, afraid that it might only anger him even more. She tried to hide her fatigue and pain, thinking that it might worsen their already strained relationship. Suddenly, in the midst of all this chaos, she noticed something strange and immediately called Theo to pay attention to what was happening. Nomi's heart began to beat faster because she knew that this could be an important moment in their journey. Pierre was shocked when he saw his horses and camels. He couldn't believe his eyes and immediately rushed towards them. It was a huge relief for him as his little ones were safe. These were his babies, and seeing them safe and sound filled Pierre with incredible joy. He was on the verge of tears, not believing that at some point they could be in such danger, but now everything was fine. At that moment, Pierre could not hide his joy, and his face was shining with happiness. He was glad that his animals were alive and unharmed because he thought that he had already lost them forever. Suddenly, a man appeared thinking that they were wanderers and offered his means of transportation, thinking that they needed help. He did not know that everything was much more complicated than he thought. Pierre replied with slight irritation that these were their camels and that they had lost them yesterday. He was sure that this was no accident and that their animals should be with them. The gentleman in turn explained to the man that these were not just camels. He had known them since birth, since they were tiny, and he claimed that he could not be mistaken. Pierre had read about it, and although he found it hard to believe, he noted that the animals were friendly, which would confirm that they were theirs, and their value was definitely high, at least 100 coins. Pierre was surprised and outraged by this question. He had no intention of buying gold, and without hiding his anger, he declared that these animals definitely belonged to them, despite any doubts on the part of this man. The man noticed the spots on the camels' backs and said that this could not be just a coincidence, because he knew that all the creatures he had met had their own distinctive features. Pierre was sure that these spots were typical only for animals from his native places and that they could not be connected with other people's camels, even though the man tried to dispute this. The gentleman could not understand what was happening. They continued to argue, but for Theo, it was all incomprehensible and he could not find a rational explanation for what was happening. Nomi explained to Theo that Pierre was most likely trying to prove that the animals belonged to him. The seller in turn asked why his friend was so aggressive and why he was trying to sort this matter out. At this time, other people approached them who clearly did not understand what was happening here. Everything that was happening looked strange and unusual, and this only added tension to the situation. It seemed they needed to clear the way as everyone present was confused about what to do in this situation. Everyone tried to somehow intervene and solve the problem, but everyone had different approaches. Pierre continued to insist that the camels belonged to them. The gentleman in turn was shocked that the young man was so stubborn and did not know how to deal with him in this conflict. The lady asked not to interfere, allowing Pierre to continue his fight for the right to animals. Pierre insisted that if you look closely at the spots on the hooves, everything will become clear and no one will be able to dispute it. The man decided that it was just a coincidence and said that enough of this talk was enough. He clearly did not want to waste any more time on a useless argument and insisted on his own. After that, the man asked them why they were making such a noise in this forgotten place. He did not understand what made them so worried because they all seemed strange and annoying to him. The man looked like a knight, but his behavior in such heat, especially in this place, was suspicious. Everything about his actions seemed strange, and Pierre could not help but notice it. Pierre asked them who they were and began to suspect that they might be in cahoots with the seller trying to hide something or take advantage of the situation to their advantage. Pierre continued asking questions, clarifying what they meant by suspicious. He was sure that there was something hidden behind it, and that the man with them was not clean, perhaps with some hidden intentions. The man answered with confidence that he would be the one asking the questions here. He was determined and did not seem to be going to back down, unlike Pierre, who despite his aggressiveness seemed a little confused. The man suddenly realized that they were not knights, but rather militiamen, and this changed his attitude towards them. He decided that it would be much wiser to stay away from them because their behavior became increasingly alarming to him. The man remarked that it was strange that they were there, as the place had become famous for its frequent occurrences of thieves. He began to suspect that this was no coincidence, and perhaps their presence was related to criminal activity. Suddenly he noticed that there was a foreign woman with them, which added suspicion to the whole situation. He was sure that something illegal was happening here, and that meant that they had to be thoroughly checked. The man demanded identification from everyone who was with him. The salesman, without hesitation, immediately showed his documents showing that everything was in order. He hoped that this would calm the situation and help avoid unnecessary problems. The salesman introduced himself as Majid, claiming he was heading to the capital to do business. This statement was meant to put an end to their previous accusations, but not everyone was ready to take his words at face value. The man, however, did not trust Majid and called the others to present their identification cards. He was determined to check each one meticulously to ensure their authenticity, as the situation could clearly take an unexpected turn. Theo felt tense when it was time for him to present his documents. He knew it could be dangerous because his identity was not open to everyone, and he did not want his disclosure to attract unnecessary attention. The others couldn't understand what they were expecting from them. The situation was strange to them. They still had to show their ID cards, although they didn't understand what exactly could be the reason for such interest. Theo tensed with anxiety, knowing that he couldn't just give away his details. He felt that this check could have serious consequences for everyone in his company. The seller tried to justify everything by saying that it was his friend's son, and the red-haired young man was his own son. He claimed that he was trying to give the animals to his friend as a wedding present and did not even consult his father. The man was surprised to hear this explanation and asked the next question: where did the merchant's son get such an unusual tattoo? He could not understand how it was connected with their actions, and this only added to the suspicion. The salesman tried to explain that children are different now and that they often dream of becoming knights and admire people like this man. That is why his son got this tattoo, to emphasize his commitment to this ideal. The man began to scold Pierre, accusing him of not teaching his son properly. He said that the boy was a bastard and he could not understand how his father had failed to teach him anything useful. He continued to express his dissatisfaction, saying that his son was now a hopeless case. The parental disappointment in his eyes became more and more obvious, and it became clear to everyone that the relationship between them was not an easy one. The man continued to scold Pierre, accusing him of not caring about raising his son. He wondered if he was really so helpless that he couldn't teach him the basic lessons of life. The man seemed to be on the verge of despair. He could not understand how Pierre could treat his son like that and accused him of irresponsibility. All this did not add calm to the already tense situation. The man said that was enough and that they had to leave. There was obvious weariness in his voice from everything that was happening, and he was glad that this useless argument had finally come to an end. He did not want to waste any more time on these empty discussions. As they parted, the man wished them luck on their journey, hoping that they would soon disappear from his life. He was glad that they were finally gone, and he did not have to interact with them anymore. The salesman, despite everything, noticed that now it seemed they owed him. He was sure that after all this stormy scene he should get something in return, so that all this would not go to waste. The merchant also noted that it was incredibly strange that water had appeared in Antena. He was sure that if the restoration was successful, this place could again become an important center of trade, which was very valuable and could bring profit. This was valuable information, and the merchant believed that it was enough to pay for the animals. He hoped that with this knowledge they would be able to continue their trade with greater success in the future. Theo noted that this was also beneficial for him and asked the seller for a place to stay overnight. The seller, having listened to him, said that in this case he had a couple of questions. The shopkeeper pointed out that it was important to know how long Theo had been a knight. This was important to understand his status and why he was here. The seller noted that the tattoo on Theo's body looked realistic. Pierre said that he became a knight 10 years ago and returned home 2 years ago. The seller said the tattoo was quite old and the symbols had changed since then. He noted that many things had changed, not only the tattoos themselves, but also the knights themselves, their status and role in society. Theo, trying to figure out which way to go, asked the merchant. The merchant replied that everything had gone downhill since the palace had started handing out knighthoods to those willing to pay the most. The seller continued that many people now buy knight titles. These people walk around the area, behave like real knights, but only because they have money. The seller said that rumors say that these fake knights are involved in human trafficking, and many people have gone missing after falling into their hands. Theo realized that they were probably approaching them for this very reason. The seller added that if they had fallen into the hands of these people, they would have either been taken to the palace or sold. The capital was once a thriving trading center, but has now become a hotbed of lawlessness and corruption. People can no longer find the truth, and many are only looking for profit. Nomi thought that the wedding could wait, that they needed to stay alert. In times like these, it was important to be prepared for any eventuality. Pierre was very grateful for the help, but the salesman said that it was not worth the thanks. He, like them, wanted to get out of this situation and avoid further troubles. If they had been kidnapped, these people would have taken not only them, but also the animals. Pierre had found Pierre screamed that he was right and demanded that what belonged to him be returned. The salesman said he had heard everything he wanted to hear and noted that Pierre had called him a thief, but the salesman considered himself their savior rather than their enemy. The salesman said he would now show them where they could spend the night and welcome them. This was his home, and they would be safe at least for the night. Theo asked the vendor if everything was okay and if they should contact the village chief. The vendor replied that they did not need permission to spend the night. They were simply traveling, buying and selling goods, and often dealing with different people, including foreigners. The salesman added that he didn't really know how many people he had to deal with. Even the head of the settlement couldn't greet everyone who showed up, but he wasn't the one in charge here. The salesman heard the woman scream that it all looked terrible. The man next to her tried to calm her down, saying that she was worrying too much. The woman was shocked that he took all this so seriously and could not understand how this man could get married with such an attitude towards life. The woman who introduced herself as Capri was the village chief's sister. She was sure that her brother could not have managed without her help. Theo was stunned by how dependent the man was on this woman and realized that in this settlement she was the one who made all the decisions. The women began asking which of the two men who had come with Noemi was her partner. She didn't quite understand what they were talking about, but she felt that the questions were not random. The women asked which one of them was her partner. Noemi explained that it was Theo, and everyone began to talk about how handsome he was and how romantic his name sounded. The woman noticed that Theo looked especially attractive, and the other women began repeating his name, emphasizing how it sounded. Noemi tried to explain that she called him more beautiful because he really was. The women continued to discuss how incredibly romantic it was. The woman from the other end of the table added that it was all clear now. The big guy with fiery hair was free. The woman advised Noemi not to worry and to relax because she didn't have to be so polite. The women wondered how long they had been together, and one asked if they had just started dating. Noemi was a little confused, but still answered that they were married, although the official ceremony had not yet been held. The women were delighted and began asking questions, asking for details, because this meant that Theo had proposed to her. One of the women asked if they had ever had anything more intimate, and Noemi immediately understood what they were talking about. The woman added that she just assumed that this was an important moment for the young couple and that they could spend the night together, as is usually the case in marriage. Noemi, embarrassed, confirmed that they had indeed just begun their relationship and that there was still more to come. The women continued their questions, not wanting to miss a single detail. The woman noticed how much Noemi blushed and said that now it was clear that everything was exactly like that. Noemi tried to justify herself by saying that they hadn't done it yet, but the women didn't believe her since such moments usually happen sooner or later. The woman sitting next to him said she knew what he was talking about and that it always happened on the wedding night. Noemi was confused, trying to understand what the woman meant, but they continued to insist that all married couples spent the night together. Noemi, remembering that none of this was real, wondered if this was considered an event. The woman noticed her embarrassment and continued that on such a night, a man and a woman usually not only spend time together but also become much closer. The woman insisted that it was something magical that made this night special and asked if it had already happened. Noemi was very embarrassed, and the woman noticed her cheeks turning red, which meant that she was probably really going through all of this. The woman laughed and said that it was probably all true, that there had already been something important between them. Noemi tried to say that nothing like that had actually happened, but the women didn't believe her because they were newlyweds and it was a great time for intimacy. Noemi understood what was being said and could now imagine why Theo had acted the way he had. The woman noticed with a smile how much Noemi blushed, which confirmed her suspicions. Noemi, confused, said she didn't know, but added that Theo was angry and now wouldn't talk to her. The women asked him why he did this, and Noemi explained that it was because he kissed another man. The women were in complete shock and could not believe that she had made such a mistake. The women continued to ask curious questions, hoping to get more details. They wanted to know how and why it all happened, but they couldn't seem to understand why Noemi was so upset about the situation. The woman suggested with a grin that perhaps Noemi simply wanted Theo to forgive her, and added without hesitation that she might as well ask for forgiveness. Noemi did not deny it. Her face flushed slightly with embarrassment, but she remained silent. She acknowledged that the situation had become much more complicated than she had imagined, and she was now completely unclear about what to do next. She felt confused and vulnerable, unsure of what the next step was to make things right. The woman noted that there was no need to panic and suggested that Noemi not worry, but instead ask her for advice. She was sure that she was very knowledgeable in such matters and could help sort out the situation. The woman was sure that she could help Noemi deal with Theo. She was experienced in such matters and had already offered to spend some time to understand how to deal with men like Theo. The women began discussing Noemi and Theo's relationship, asking questions that touched on what they considered to be their strange relationship. It soon became clear that there was much more going on in Nomi and Theo's lives than they had initially thought. Meanwhile, it was getting dark, and Theo entered the women's hut. He quietly approached Nomi and addressed her, informing her that her bed was ready. Everything around seemed to stop for a moment when he said these words. Theo simply said that the bed was ready, but when he said this, the women immediately began to surround Nomi with advice. It looked like he was coming to pick up his wife, and the girls were delighted that everything was happening so quickly and began to vigorously discuss their relationship. The girls seemed a little confused as they had already started joking and shipping the couple. His words about the bed being ready sounded so unexpected that they couldn't help but talk, even if they were a little surprised by this statement. The woman looked at Nomi with surprise and asked why she was still sitting when it was time for her to go. She thought that the woman should have gone to Theo a long time ago so that they could spend the night together. The other women noticed how good Theo and Nomi looked together. They noticed that he came to pick up his wife. Although he was a little angry, it was as if their relationship was now becoming more and more obvious to everyone around them. The women had given her too much advice, and sitting there, Nomi couldn't figure out how she could do the right thing in this situation. There were many thoughts in her head, and each of them seemed not so right. One of the women suggested the first step, asking Theo to sleep with her. She claimed that it would be the right and obvious step to fix everything. Nomi was shocked by this advice, but she still began to think about it. The woman continued. The next step would be to undress and then just jump on him. It sounded so ridiculous and bold that Nomi couldn't even believe that such things happened in real life, but everyone around her was sure that this was how it was supposed to be. Nomi tried to argue that it would be very embarrassing for her and Theo, and she couldn't imagine how it would happen. But the women insisted that there shouldn't be such embarrassment between a husband and wife because they were already married. The women continued their admonition, saying that Nomi had to make up for lost time and that both Theo and she would be happy. In their opinion, this was the right thing to do, and they were sure that they would both enjoy it. Nomi was so embarrassed that she couldn't look at Theo. She couldn't imagine how she would meet his gaze if he came back. Her heart was beating so hard that she felt her face getting even redder with embarrassment. She thought she would die of shame. However, whether she would spend the night with Theo was still unclear, but the words he had said about her bed being ready made it seem as if everything had already been decided. Nomi felt a little anxious and uneasy at the thought of what was to come. She decided to stay there for the night despite the excitement. Knowing that the color of the tent would help her remember where she was, she felt that it would be a little calmer here. Theo was a little worried, feeling that something was wrong, but the lady shook her head, assuring him that she was fine. He couldn't understand what was going on, but decided to leave her alone. Theo noticed that Nomi's face was flushed and thought she might have a fever, but she assured him that she felt fine. He agreed, but was still not entirely sure about her condition. Theo suggested that she change into more comfortable clothes and also give her gloves and some food in case she wanted a snack during the night. He thought that might be useful. Even though he was angry, Theo did all this and wished her good night. Nomi stopped him, saying that she was very sorry for everything. She felt that her apology was important even if it was late. She admitted that she was going to be his wife, and she thought she should have thought twice before kissing someone else. She sincerely apologized, knowing that she could have done better. Theo noticed that he thought he would be fine, but now he realized that the situation was not that simple. His face was a little sad, and Nomi became even more embarrassed by his words. Nomi thought about his words, and her heart was beating hard as if something bad was about to happen. She couldn't understand why she felt so anxious and nervous at that moment. She wanted to spend the night with Theo, but when she thought about how he might react, she felt like his anger might come out. This added to her even more anxiety and embarrassment. Everything that had happened since their first meeting had been far from simple. Although looking at his smile, she felt that something beyond the ordinary could become the norm in their relationship. Theo looked at her and thought that maybe the night with Nomi had been long and intense. He still couldn't figure out what was going on in his head, but he felt that she occupied an important place in his life. Nomi fed the camel, trying to distract herself from her thoughts, but her attention slipped away, and she kept thinking about Theo. She couldn't figure out exactly what was bothering her, but she felt it was important. Theo approached her, pointing to the location where she was. He asked if she had slept well. Nomi felt awkward, not sure if she was ready to meet his gaze. Theo took her hand and said that they needed to talk. Pierre and Nomi discussed whether they would move with the camp. This was an important point for their future plans and safety. Theo said they would go with the traders to the capital until the security situation improved. He was sure it was the safest route considering how difficult it was to enter Ceylon. Pierre was not sure about these traders and suggested stopping doubting their honesty. However, Theo noted that judging by how they had held out so far, they could be trusted. However, Pierre continued to express doubts, saying that they could not trust these merchants since they were expecting an unclear payment. Theo did not agree, but was also worried that everything could end unexpectedly. Theo offered to convince the head of the merchants so that they could move on safely. He was sure that this would not be a problem, especially if they acted decisively and wisely. Theo watched the woman who seemed to be the leader of the group closely. He noticed that she could make all the decisions. He saw how the traders addressed her, and this showed her importance. The woman spoke of talking to the chieftains, and Theo sensed that she would be the one deciding whether to continue on their journey. He knew that her influence was leading them to the right decision. The woman noted that her father would do everything she said anyway. This indicated her major role in decision-making. Theo knew that her help would be decisive in their further actions. The woman had noticed that Theo had a talent for annoying people and had even brought strangers here. He couldn't help but smile, realizing that her words, although harsh, were true. The girls began to discuss the necklace that the groom had given them, and this caught the woman's attention. She insisted that it go to her, believing that it would look better on her. The woman offered an exchange. She would take the necklace if Nomi gave it to her. This offer shocked the girl, and she did not know how to react to it, but the woman was sure of her right to such an exchange. Pierre asked Theo what his plan was. Theo, smiling openly, asked if Pierre thought he would be able to seduce the girl since he was not married yet. This made Pierre feel embarrassed. The woman suggested that Pierre ask permission to come with them. Pierre said, irritably, that he hated being alone, and Theo, with a slight sigh, suggested that he flirt, but not kiss another man's wife. Theo joked that perhaps Pierre would find a wife here, and despite everything he had to move forward, not stop at little Pierre thought about it, realizing that the path could be dangerous but also interesting. When Pierre returned, Theo immediately asked how it had gone. Pierre himself was not sure, but judging by his appearance, the result was positive. Theo was proud of him for having decided to do it. Pierre admitted that it was all his fault, and he wasn't sure that the girl liked him. He felt insecure, although Theo assured him that everything was fine and he still had enough chances. Pierre mentioned that the woman wanted to talk to Theo. Theo, a little surprised, promised to be attentive and listen, not understanding what exactly she needed from him at that moment. The woman noticed that the girls liked to discuss necklaces and other things, and one of them suggested that it would look better on her. Theo did not interfere, observing what was happening. She again insisted that Nomi give her the necklace, claiming that it would suit her perfectly. Nomi was shocked by this demand and did not know what to do in this situation. The woman added that she would offer her item in exchange, but Nomi, still stunned, could not believe that she was being offered such an exchange. It was unexpected and strange for her. A girl in the group noticed that the trinket Nomi had would actually suit her much better. She insisted that she give it to her. Nomi was confused, not knowing how to react. Pierre, noticing that the situation was getting out of control, asked Theo what was next. Theo, in turn, joked, asking if Pierre thought he would be able to seduce a woman since he was still single. Theo advised Pierre to ask permission to go with them, noting that he should not continue to be alone. Pierre, irritably commenting that he hated being alone, accepted the offer despite his displeasure. Theo sighed and added that Pierre should flirt with women, but remember to have boundaries, especially when it came to other people's wives. He joked a little, saying that Pierre might find a partner on the road. Theo suggested that Pierre might find his destiny among the women they were traveling with. He continued mockingly, saying that Pierre should not stop but move forward to see what life would bring. When Pierre returned, Theo immediately asked if his request had worked. Pierre, with doubt in his voice, replied that he was not sure of the result, but Theo noted that he could be proud of himself for trying. Pierre admitted that perhaps it was all his fault, and that the woman was most likely not interested in him. Theo, however, supported him, assuring him that Pierre still had a chance if he continued to act. Pierre said the woman wanted to talk to Theo. Theo promised to listen to her, even though he didn't know what she was going to talk about. He wasn't sure it would be a pleasant conversation, but he was willing to listen. Pierre tried to calm the girl down, saying that Theo was a good talker and that he would be fine. Nomi, still worried, could not completely relax, hoping that the situation would improve. When Pierre left, the woman asked again if they wanted to go to the capital. Theo confirmed that this was in their plans, as the capital could be considered a safer place for their further actions. The woman asked what specific business they had in the capital. Theo replied that his main goal was to get married, which was an important part of their trip and the new relationship they wanted to build. The woman was a little annoyed when she heard this, assuming that Theo was in love with the silver-haired woman. After all, she thought he was more traditional than she had assumed. Theo confirmed that this was true, but added that he would not express his thoughts out loud. The woman realized that he was not really ready to talk openly about his feelings and decided to leave the matter at that. She suggested starting with the traditional greeting. Although Theo did not understand what she was talking about, he felt that something important was eluding him, but he did not ask unnecessary questions following her instructions. The woman explained that it was tradition for them to greet each other before entering the tent. Theo, not knowing what the custom was, followed her instructions, trying to figure out what was expected of him in this situation. Theo, a little confused, nevertheless tried to fulfill her request and go outside. The woman emphasized that he himself asked for a continuation, and now he should greet her according to all the rules as is customary among them. Theo, not understanding what was happening, sighed and agreed, deciding that it was for the common good. He felt that it was not quite what he wanted, but he tried to do everything as the situation required. Theo assumed the woman wanted them to meet in the traditional manner, with a kiss on the cheek. He sighed and agreed, knowing that it had to be done to keep things going according to established rules. Although Theo was not sure about the traditions of Seon, he understood that this was necessary for further communication with the women and for the successful continuation of their path. He decided to do this for the sake of peace and trust in the group. When Nomi saw Theo and the woman kiss on the cheek, she was horrified. It was unexpected for her, and she couldn't believe that it happened. Theo felt a little awkward but didn't complain. After that, the guy asked if she was happy. The girl was shocked because he had such a sad reaction. The woman agreed and said that she was not interested in continuing to communicate with him. Theo realized that her feelings were not mutual and decided not to insist on talking. She was confident in her decision. Suddenly, she noticed that this woman reminded her of her rabbit. This was an interesting and funny discovery for her, and she felt that she could be teased a little. The woman boldly declared that she would allow them to go to the capital, but warned them that they should be careful and not cause trouble along the way. She emphasized that it was better to follow her instructions to avoid trouble. Theo thanked her for permission and agreed. He felt relieved that they could finally move forward and was already set on their path. The woman was pleased, and their plans were gradually becoming clear. Nomi, deciding that she had more questions about the capital, turned to the gentleman, but was immediately interrupted by a woman who called him. This left Nomi at a loss as to what to do next. The woman asked Theo to wait, but he didn't understand what she meant. She continued to move at her own pace, ignoring his confusion as if everything was very simple. The woman handed him an umbrella and asked him to hold it, but Theo felt a little uncomfortable as he had not expected. This Nomi, watching, felt herself getting upset by everything that was happening. She was extremely upset to see Theo literally fulfilling all the requests of this woman, and her emotions began to mount. Suddenly, she wanted to talk to him and clarify the situation, but she could not find a moment to talk. The woman, continuing her actions, asked Theo to help her put on her headscarf and also to play with the children, to which he responded enthusiastically. Nomi felt that his behavior was becoming increasingly strange to her. Pierre noticed that Theo was beginning to be treated like a servant. This woman was clearly manipulating him, and Pierre wondered if others thought Theo was in her debt. He himself was shocked by this attitude. Pierre couldn't understand how much more Theo would do to please this woman. He felt that the situation had gone beyond what could be normal, and his anxiety grew with each passing moment. Nomi couldn't calm down, considering that she hadn't spoken to Theo for a long time. Her thoughts couldn't escape the anxiety that had arisen after everything that had happened, and she doubted whether they should go with these traitors. Pierre noticed that Nomi had started to cry, and she confessed that she felt that something bad might happen between them. This feeling of uneasiness increased her worries, and she wanted to cry from fear. Nomi was so upset that she couldn't even stop crying. She was irritated that she couldn't control her emotions, and this made her even more desperate. She felt that everything was going wrong. The lady noticed that Nomi had never experienced such feelings before. It was a difficult experience for her, and she felt that the situation was getting out of control, which depressed her even more. Theo began to regret joining these people. He realized that it had been too impulsive an action, which now led to unclear and difficult consequences. The guiding idea seemed less and less realistic. Despite the fact that this woman was considered a saint whom everyone revered, she could also be completely ordinary, openly laugh, be jealous, and show all her emotions, which also made Theo think. Theo explained to Nomi that what she was feeling was jealousy, and that almost everyone, regardless of gender, experiences it. He tried to reassure her, saying that such emotions are normal and everyone experiences them. Theo wasn't sure if this was something to be upset about, but he suggested to Nomi that one way to feel better was to have fun. He wanted to clear her head and help her relax, hoping that it would bring relief. Theo blindfolded her and asked her to continue the game. She didn't understand what was happening, but she agreed. Although she was out of her element, there was chaos in her head, and this added even more tension to her feelings. Pierre insisted that Nomi wait a little while and listen to the clapping sounds. It was part of the game, and she had to try to concentrate to continue the fun without losing her patience. The game would end when one of the participants caught the other. Everyone laughed because Nomi didn't know what to do, and her confusion added to the fun. Pierre was sure it would be much more fun this way. Everyone around laughed as Nomi lost herself in the game, not understanding what was going on. Theo felt a little awkward, but continued to follow the instructions, trying to maintain the atmosphere of fun. Pierre joked that it was much more fun that way, and the girls added that they didn't understand how to work with such long limbs, which also became a source of jokes and laughter. Nomi felt that she was irritated by these comments. Cappy approached them, commenting that Nomi had really long arms and legs and looked quite beautiful. These comments left Nomi with mixed feelings, as they seemed strange and too personal to her. Cappy, who had come closer, untied Nomi's eyes and greeted her. Nomi felt a slight sense of relief, but her thoughts remained confused. Her worry about what was happening did not go away. Cappy asked if Nomi knew there was a rabbit in her tent. It was an unexpected question that only added more questions to Nomi's mind, and she didn't know how to feel about it. Nomi didn't understand what Cappy was trying to tell her, but the woman continued, saying that the rabbit was well taken care of. This didn't add any clarity, and Nomi felt that the conversation was becoming more and more strange and confusing. Nomi decided to ask directly what she really meant. Cappy replied that she was just saying how similar they were. This did not help Nomi, who still could not understand what was being said. Nomi interrupted their fun, not understanding what was happening, and decided to return to her thoughts. Her feelings were mixed, and she could not focus on one thing. The woman noted that they could continue their game and promised not to distract them any further. This calmed Nomi down a bit, but her thoughts were still filled with doubts and worries. Theo, watching the scene, noticed that she was adapting to the situation very well. He thought that perhaps she really was destined to become a merchant's wife, which made him even more thoughtful about her future. But Theo couldn't shake the idea that they needed to escape and find a new place to live. He dreamed of forgetting about the crown, forgetting about the past, and starting to live his own life without regard for obligations. Theo imagined a life without the Iron Crown, without all the long stories and worries that poisoned his thoughts. He dreamed of freedom, and this thought haunted him more and more. But the thoughts that came into his head seemed completely ridiculous. He knew he needed to get rid of them, stop looking for answers where there were none, and just take a walk to calm down a little. He thought that forgetting about the Iron Crown meant forgetting about his grandmother, and that was not easy. After all, the crown still meant something to him, and to give it up meant giving up everything that was connected to him. Theo remembered telling his grandmother that her crown was neither gold nor silver, but simple iron. It was not at all what he had imagined then, and now it seemed increasingly insignificant. Theo couldn't understand why this piece of metal had such significance. He didn't feel it was worth holding, and he didn't understand why there was so much importance and symbolism around it. The woman explained that it was a symbol. This metal reminds us that the world is not always black and white. It is more complex than it seems at first glance. This was her view of life that she wanted to convey. The boy couldn't help but ask again and again what this symbol meant, and the woman replied that if he was not pure in soul, then he was dirty. In her eyes, if she didn't approve, then you were on the side of evil. She said that they are taught not to look at the world in such a way that if you do not see the world in black and white, then you are a sinner. Everything must be simple, otherwise it is a hostile view of the world which does not agree with their teaching. The woman continued that as long as they had the Iron Crown, they had no need of a god. It was their faith, their life, and Theo had grown up with it, internalizing everything about the relic as the foundation of all his beliefs. The woman emphasized that this crown was a family heirloom, and that was the main thing. It was not just a thing, but a symbol that could not be forgotten. Theo understood the importance of this crown, but he still could not accept its absolute value. Theo met someone who was a complete stranger to him. He didn't know who it was because he had never met this person before. He noticed that he approached, but he didn't feel when exactly it happened. The man suddenly pulled out a staff and asked what kind of help he was talking about. After asking for forgiveness, he was ready to listen to what Theo had to say. It was strange for Theo. He never expected such a reaction from someone. Theo was amazed. The man said it was the first time he had ever heard anyone offer him anything. Usually he was the one offering help, and now he was in a position where he had to listen and understand what was being offered. Theo realized that this man was not ordinary. He was unusual. Something about him stood out. Olak asked if Theo was looking for what he was holding, hinting at something important and strange that might be connected to his relic. Theo in turn began to ask who this man was and what he wanted with his relic. The man said that he liked to make deals and offered Theo an exchange. The crown for the woman who was next to him. God offered a deal. Theo could take his relic, but in exchange he had to give up the woman who was with him. This shocked Theo. He could not believe that he was being offered such a price. Theo was horrified that he was being offered such a deal. To choose between the relic and the woman, he could not understand how this was even possible and did not know what to choose in this situation. The man waited for an answer and asked what Theo would choose. He was sure that his offer would not leave him indifferent and waited for Theo to make a decision, not knowing how it would affect his future. Theo was shocked. He couldn't believe that he had to choose between the relic and the woman. This choice put him at a dead end, and he didn't know what to do in such a difficult situation. The man continued to press, asking if Theo was willing to make such a deal. Theo tried to figure out what was really going on, but he couldn't understand why he was being forced to make such a difficult choice. Theo was full of doubts. He didn't know where the man had found the relic, and he wasn't sure if it was what he needed. It all seemed strange and ridiculous, and Theo felt like someone was just playing a joke on him. Now, Theo realized that the man was being persistent, and it was definitely not a coincidence. He was ready to do something radical to get what he wanted. This was no longer just a conversation, but a serious game. The man firmly offered Theo to clarify the situation and said that he was going to change his form slightly. He was ready to act, to show that his intentions were not just jokes, but serious. The man asked if Theo still needed what he wanted. He was determined that the events that were unfolding would not pass him by and make Theo think. The man suddenly remembered that he had to show Theo something important so that he would understand the state of his precious relic. This was to be the final proof that he was not joking. Theo was terrified, not understanding what was happening. He asked what the man was doing with his relic, but the man used magic to prevent Theo from getting closer. This added even more fear and confusion. The man ordered Theo to watch closely and remember what was happening. Theo would have to find the rest of the relic fragments himself, which meant that this was not the end, but the beginning of something even worse. The man lifted Theo into the air and told him that thanks to his generosity, he now had a chance to find the rest of the relic using this shard as a key. It was not just a warning, but an invitation to a strange and dangerous journey. The man asked Theo if he liked what was happening, but Theo could not answer because of the pain. He was shocked not knowing what to do with this proposal, and his condition became more and more desperate. The man noticed that the relic had long since split into 3 pieces, and Theo, stunned by this revelation, could not understand how such a thing was even possible. It seemed impossible, and he did not know how to deal with it. Theo was completely confused, not understanding how such a catastrophe had happened. He could not comprehend that now he needed to find all the pieces of this relic to restore its integrity. Theo felt pain again. Olak reminded him that he couldn't know how the relic's destruction happened, because the one who could explain it was already dead. Theo realized that everything depended on him now. Now Theo had to stop thinking about his wife and focus on finding the box. This task became his only priority despite all his personal feelings and attachments. Theo couldn't believe that God himself was standing in front of him. He still didn't understand what was happening and couldn't figure out what box they were talking about because it seemed impossible. Theo pointed out that even the gods weren't all powerful. If this god was really that powerful, why couldn't he handle something more important than this piece of scrap metal? Theo thought that if he could only give this scrap metal, then it clearly showed that even a god could not win the heart of the woman he was trying so hard to keep. He felt that God was now using pathetic tricks to separate him from Nomi. It seemed not only unfair but also too low for a being that everyone called all-powerful. God was shocked by these words and angrily asked Theo to be more careful with his words. This was not what he expected from this man standing before him. Theo said firmly that Nomi was his wife and he must not allow anyone, not even God, to speak of her as if she were simply his property. This was his personal sacred. God could not believe that this wretched man dared to speak like that. He felt that his authority was being challenged, and this revolted him. He was not prepared to accept this. God assured him that he would soon possess the relic, and then Theo would become weak and helpless, but Nomi would return to him and everything would fall into place again. Theo said with certainty that this would not happen. He was not prepared to give in and refused to believe the threats that God made to him. He knew that he had to do something different. God mockingly said that if Theo did not believe him, then he should simply follow his desires and eventually choose the box. One way or another, everything would be resolved. God disappeared, leaving Theo with one last word. When the box was complete and in his hands, he would return for his wife. Everything that had happened had led to this moment. It was all part of a plan to get Theo back in his place. He was willing to do anything for Nomi, even though God was trying to use her as a bargaining chip. Enzo noticed that all the candles had gone out and the flowers had withered. Everything seemed dark and gloomy, as if nature itself sensed the tension that hung in the air. Suddenly, a god appeared before him. Enzo immediately bowed and greeted him, sensing that something important and inevitable was happening in his presence. God was very angry with this covered merchant. He did not understand how this pathetic man dared to touch his wife. He was sure that this should not have happened, and he was ready to punish him for it. If he hadn't saved her in that village, there would have been no such bond between them. But now that the artifact was in his hands, he knew that their bond would begin to fray. The artifact and the fragments they were collecting could cause the destruction of the future his wife had once envisioned. Human greed always interfered, ruining all that was good. The more pieces they collected, the faster their future would lose its shape. The perfect world he had envisioned for his wife was no longer possible with every step of their search. And then when everything is destroyed, his sister will finally come to her senses and return to him. Her power will become his power, and they will be able to rule this world together, restoring their power. But until then, he needs to not be lazy and continue to fulfill his role. He needs to bring more flowers and help collect the fragments, otherwise his plans may be thwarted. Theo thought about the god's words, that when the artifact was assembled, he would come to take his wife. He was sure that this was some kind of nonsense, but he felt inside that the situation would be difficult. He shook his head, trying to push these thoughts away, believing that there was no point in wasting time on such threats. He was sure that everything could be fixed and that he himself would decide his fate. Nomi caught up with him and asked him what was wrong with his face. Theo didn't know what to say to her, and she became even more worried. He just stood there in silence, unable to say anything to her. She immediately noticed that there was a bruise and traces of blood on his face, which worried her greatly. The changes on her face were obvious, and she suggested that they immediately take care of his wounds. Theo assured her that everything was fine, but the girl, unable to stop herself, insisted on treating the wound as quickly as possible. Her concern was noticeable, and he could not refuse it. Nomi offered to treat his wounds as soon as possible before they left any scars, but Theo again said he was fine. However, she was not going to let him go with such injuries. He told her that he needed to meet Cappy because she had given him an assignment, but she wasn't there. He kept saying that everything was fine, but she couldn't leave him without help. Theo said that he would take the medicine from Cappy, but Nomi was upset to hear this. She did not want him to leave and insisted that he stay until she took care of his wounds. She decided that she couldn't let him leave in this state and asked him not to leave until she treated his wounds. Theo didn't quite understand what was happening, but they accidentally hugged at that moment. The girl wanted him to run quickly, but he also wanted to say something. She apologized, explaining that she just wanted him to take care of himself first before leaving. Theo didn't expect to feel so embarrassed by her concern. He had been busy all day, and now that she was around, he felt uncomfortable. He couldn't contain his emotions. Nomi didn't understand what was happening and continued to worry. The fragment of the magical artifact moved on its own, and she couldn't understand why it affected her so much. She noticed that she didn't want to let him go wounded, but Theo insisted that she move away. She didn't understand his reaction and asked again what was going on, but he was adamant. He was telling her to move away, even though the shard was pulling her toward it. It was a strange phenomenon, but he couldn't say more. He just kept telling her not to get too close. Pierre was shocked by what was happening. He couldn't believe that they had to travel so far for this. He was sure that everything that was happening between the two of them had to be resolved. He felt that there would be problems between him and Theo. He listened to their conversations and thought that they were exhausting each other too much with their experiences and passions. Pierre was exhausted. He was already tired of all these endless conversations and moods, and all this seemed too tense to him for everyone around him. Theo walked up to Pierre, leaned over and covered his mouth. He hoped that his wife had gone into the tent and that there would be no one around to interrupt their conversation. He tried to tell Pierre that he had business and he had to keep quiet. Theo did not want anyone from outside to interfere with their plans and statements and hoped that everything would calm down. Pierre was in complete shock. He couldn't even imagine that because of all this, he would have to go so far, spend his time and energy solving such cases. It all seemed incredible to him. He had put a lot of effort into Theo and Nomi, trying to help them and be there for them, but now he was plagued by doubts. He felt that the situation between him and Theo had already gone too far, and now they seemed to be in serious trouble. Pierre listened to them both, but was very puzzled by their behavior. He was ready to leave them for a couple of days without food, so that they would finally realize what was happening around them. All these couples with their quirks were starting to frankly wear him out. The unbearable tension and strange situations happening around him literally froze him. Some people are simply not allowed to love, and perhaps this was the case with them. But at that moment, Theo went to Pierre and covered his mouth. He hoped that his wife had finally gone into the tent so as not to disturb their conversation. Theo tried to convey to Pierre that he had his own things to do, and now he had to sit silently and not interfere. 1070. Theo reported that he was given a choice: the artifact or his wife, and apparently this moron was a god. He couldn't believe he was in this situation at all. Pierre laughed and asked again, was he really saying that it was a god? He could not believe that Theo acknowledged the existence of gods. Marriage really does change people, Pierre thought, surprised. He decided that perhaps Theo had indeed met a god. But if that was true, he didn't understand why he had picked up the shard. It seemed that the choice had been difficult, and decisions had not yet been made. Theo admitted that he himself did not yet know what he wanted, the artifact or a future with the woman he was at a crossroads, and internal doubts did not leave him. But one thing was certain: for the first time in his life he wanted to protect someone. The artifact was valuable to him, having been left by a close relative. Nomi was important, but he couldn't just throw away this legacy even if he wanted to protect his wife. Pierre felt how difficult the choice was for Theo. He couldn't just let go of everything connected to the artifact. This relic was part of his life and memory, and giving it up would be a mistake even for love. Theo still didn't know what his great-aunt wanted to do with this artifact. He couldn't brush aside such a mystery and leave everything that was important to him just for the sake of love. But on the other hand, he couldn't just leave his wife for the artifact. The choice was too difficult, and Theo knew that his decision would have consequences. He didn't want to regret his choice later. Theo pointed out that no matter what his choice was, he didn't want to go back and regret it. So he needed to make a decision he wouldn't regret. Nomi was not part of his choices either. Theo wondered if perhaps her desires and feelings were not part of this choice either. He did not want it all to be decided by circumstances rather than by genuine feelings. Theo hoped that if he and Nomi chose each other, it would not be because of pressure, but because of true feelings. He did not want their relationship to be the result of coercion. Pierre had no idea what to do, but he decided that Theo had called him for a reason. He hoped that he could help his friend, and he realized that they could find a solution to this situation together. Theo asked Pierre to help him pick up the pieces and make a choice he wouldn't regret. It was more than just a decision, it was a path that would lead to the right decision. Pierre realized that Theo was not only asking him for help in finding the shards, but also in resolving his feelings. It was his style, to ask for advice when he himself could not sort out his emotions. Theo confirmed that he would be grateful if Pierre would help him, especially since he had a duty to his friend. He hoped that Pierre's help would help him find the right path and not make a mistake in his choice. Pierre smiled, knowing that he would definitely do everything in his power now. He was ready to help his friend, knowing how important it was for Theo and what consequences there could be from a wrong decision. Theo reminded him not to touch the artifact with bare hands. He felt that something important was hidden in this warning and did not want Pierre to be mistaken because this was not just an object. Pierre remembered his grandmother warning him not to touch the box with his bare hands. He still didn't understand the meaning of this caution, but curiosity tormented him, and he asked many questions. Grandma promised to explain when he became an adult. These were adult matters that needed to be understood only at the right moment. Pierre was sure that someday it would all become clear. Theo suddenly remembered a strange moment. A snake and a mongoose fought, and the snake killed the mongoose but could not destroy his fangs. Pierre did not understand what kind of story it was, but Theo himself said that it was just memories of his grandmother. The fangs that sank into the snake's neck were dangerous, and the snake swallowed them, but they continued to thrash about in its belly. Theo thought for a moment and then returned to the conversation about the box and its meaning. Pierre asked again what that was just, and Theo, a little embarrassed, replied that it was just a random flashback about his grandmother. He did not want to go into details and preferred to return to the current questions. Theo pointed out again that they couldn't touch the shards with their bare hands, and Pierre had long since realized that they were prepared to proceed with caution to avoid making a mistake that could have serious consequences. They decided to make a plan to find the shards later, but now Theo felt he had to hurry. His wife was worried and he couldn't leave her alone. He had to go back and reassure her. Pierre noticed with irony that Theo was talking about his wife again, and he reminded himself more and more that he had to be careful about this. He couldn't avoid it, but he felt that he was talking about her too much. The man didn't know what to do next. The Church of Olak began to actively spread the news about the fur guards. This put Theo in a very difficult position, and he didn't know how to find a way out of this situation. The fur guards were excommunicated. Now anyone who bore that name was subject to exclusion. It was an extreme measure, and Theo knew he had to find another way to avoid final isolation. Theo realized that excommunication was the last resort, and he had to find another way to solve the problem. He couldn't let his family disappear like that. After these events, Theo sat in his office thinking about how not to lose his family and legacy. He realized that no family could help if there was no right way. The Durdettes, second only to the Fur Guards in terms of donations, were now competitors. Theo knew that they were unlikely to interfere in his affairs, but he could not count on their help in such a situation. Theo suddenly noticed something lying under the table. He felt the envelope and immediately became interested. His intuition told him that it could be an important message. The man was horrified when he saw his brother Theo's handwriting on the envelope. This message was obviously something important, and he knew he needed to open it as soon as possible. This letter was clearly addressed to his father. It said that when he read these lines, their family would probably be in a difficult situation. The situation they were facing was not easy, and he understood it very well. He knew that their family had always been on the edge. They had the blood of merchants in their veins, and that always made them vulnerable in the eyes of others. They might consider themselves nobles, but to the outside world, that didn't change who they were. They may have become nobles in the eyes of many, but in reality, everything remained the same. They were still the same merchants, despite their new titles and status. Their origins had not changed, and they still had to fight for recognition. He was confident that the path he had chosen would lead their family to prosperity. He expected that the difficulties they faced would eventually bear fruit. This choice was not just a step for him, but a guarantee of future success. He was continuing the work of the one who cared most about the family. This man had created their family, and now he had to continue his work. He knew that his efforts and his hands would be the basis for the family's prosperity. He was determined to show everyone that their roots were nothing to be ashamed of. They should not hide their history, but rather be proud of it. He was ready to fight to ensure that their heritage was not forgotten. He believed that they did not deserve to be punished for saving a stranger. They should not be cast out or condemned for their actions. He believed that support, not persecution, should be their reward. If his father shared his beliefs, he would have to find the Montemond family. This family could provide them with protection, and this would be an important step in their journey. He hoped that his father would make the right decision and help them get out of this situation. At that moment, the boy thought he realized that the Montemonds were representatives of the royal family, and their interests were opposed to the Bolognas. He would never have thought to ask them for help, but now everything looked different. He could not understand how this headstrong young man could have foreseen such a move. He wondered how he had been so far-sighted as to find himself in the center of this vicious circle, ready to open up before him. Enzo was happy because finally these sinners decided to act. He was sure that now that they had started their steps, everything would soon change. This situation, which had been on the brink for a long time, would finally begin to develop. They were already on the outskirts of the city and were planning to arrive in the capital the next day. Time does not wait, and they needed to buy everything they needed at the market to continue their journey with maximum readiness. Theo said they would meet at the end, but then he noticed that the girl had run away. He couldn't figure out what she was going to do, but maybe she was just minding her own business. He looked at Pierre again and noticed that the guy was looking at him curiously. She was not far away, and next to Pierre. They began to try the local cuisine, enjoying new tastes and traditions. But seeing her flirting, Theo could not help but worry. He just wanted her not to get lost. Pierre called Theo to eat, but Theo couldn't shake the thought that he needed to warn Noémie. He was worried that she might get lost or that something would happen, and he wanted to make sure that she wouldn't get lost among all these people. Noémie meanwhile stood and watched the couples enjoying each other's company. She suddenly thought that maybe this is what real people in love look like. She couldn't help but admire their openness. She saw a couple where the guy was holding the girl's hand. At that moment, her memories took her back to when she and Theo were in the same situation. It was a long time ago, but now that she was looking at others, her feelings were heightened. She felt very embarrassed when these thoughts entered her head. Her face was red with shame, and she didn't know how to react. Cappy noticed her state and immediately asked why she and Theo didn't act the same way. Cappy wondered why she and her husband were never so affectionate. Maybe many men tried to pick her up without knowing she was married. Nomi was puzzled and couldn't understand why she was constantly asked about this. Nomi asked her what she was saying. It was so rude that she couldn't even process it. Cappy was surprised by her reaction and reminded her that she thought they were just playing the role of husband and wife like in a theater. The woman couldn't understand why Nomi was reacting this way, and this confused her even more. She assumed that perhaps she didn't like Theo or that she had her eye on him. Nomi felt awkward and decided it was best not to continue the conversation. She thought that perhaps Cappy thought she had a claim on Theo. It was unfair, and she wanted to clarify that, but there was still uncertainty in her voice. Nomi tried to ask Cappy to listen to her more carefully, but at that moment she didn't notice how she tripped and fell. Cappy caught her instantly, but at that moment something strange happened. Nomi was shocked, not believing what she had just seen. In her vision, Cappy was holding a sickle covered in blood. It was so strange and terrifying that she could not immediately understand the meaning of what she had seen. The woman didn't understand what was happening. She noticed that the girl had a strange expression on her face. Cappy herself was in shock, clearly realizing something, and this only increased Nomi's anxiety. Cappy whispered in her ear that she saw it too. It was the man who always followed them like their shadow. Nomi felt that something was wrong and had to be careful. She noticed that the man had the symbol of the followers of Olak. This meant that he was one of them, and he seemed to recognize her. She realized that they were in even greater danger than they thought. The woman immediately warned Nomi to immediately inform her people, as this man was clearly targeting her. He was dangerous and intended to act. Action had to be taken immediately. Nomi noticed that Theo was in danger. He was in the danger zone and she couldn't stand by. Realizing that she couldn't just watch, she rushed to help him. But she was stopped and greeted as a goddess. The man was apparently amazed that she was here in such a distant land. He could not believe that he had met her after such a long search. He said that since childhood he had dreamed of receiving her blessing. For him, she was the most beloved goddess, and now having met her, he could not believe that he had finally realized his dream. However, one day he heard rumors that she had run away with a man of low birth. At first he did not believe it, but soon followed her and came here following her tracks in search of an answer. He said that at first he didn't believe these rumors, but when he got here he realized that it was all true. He was ready to do everything to bring her back to his followers and his God. He said he couldn't understand how she could think she could escape. For him, the world was a divine garden, and he was sure she couldn't escape her destiny. The man demanded that she return. Her followers were waiting for her, as well as her God, who was ready to welcome her with open arms. He urged her to return to them. Nomi decided that this couldn't be true. She couldn't accept that her life would be determined by someone else's interests. The woman helped her make this decision, and she felt she had to act. She began to suspect that her marriage was something forbidden. Since the ceremony was held in a foreign country, she did not expect that her husband would be not only a human, but also someone connected to Olak. The man started shouting that she needed to be grabbed immediately, but she was not going to give in. She hit him again, showing that she was not ready to give in and retreat from her beliefs. She replied that she would explain everything later, but now she had to run to her husband. It was not just running away. It was the only salvation she could find in this situation. The man kept shouting that the goddess was trying to escape. He ordered his men to capture her at any cost. It was his order, and he was not going to leave her alone. Nomi rushed to Theo, who clearly did not understand what was happening. He could not understand why she ran away so quickly, but she felt that danger was near, and he needed urgent help. But Theo was in a dangerous situation. He had a knife hanging from his neck, and only his friend was able to intervene in time. He threw himself at the unknown man, saving Theo from imminent danger. Theo was completely confused by what was happening. He could not understand who these people were and what they wanted. He began to suspect that they were being followed by followers who were being used to track them down. Nomi, realizing the gravity of the situation, quickly explained that these were Olak's followers. She feared that the priestesses had sent them, and they had to be very careful. It was important to keep an eye out. Theo ordered her to hide, but he could not believe that this man would do such a thing. He felt that he was nothing and did not understand how he was being persecuted in a foreign country. The man, angry, gave the order to destroy everyone who was with him except the goddess Nomi had to stay alive. This was their main demand, and he was not going to change his plans. Nomi and Theo couldn't understand who these people were. They couldn't imagine how such people could easily fall into their trap and that their pursuit could be so dangerous. They knew that time was not on their side. If they had not acted quickly, they would have already fallen into the hands of these people, but they still believed that they could get out, and they continued to fight. Soon, if they hadn't hurried, everything could have ended in disaster. But Theo and Nomi were determined and confident that they could win. After all, they weren't going to give up.